Good evening, everyone. Good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the council's YouTube channel, and I welcome viewers joining us online. Can I please request that any mobile phones are either set to silent or switched off for the duration of the meeting. Please can also take this time to remind members regarding the procedure for tonight's agenda. Should members of the Scrutiny Committee wish to amend, remove or add additional recommendations or requests as part of the Scrutiny Committee's remit, then please could I ask members to state and propose their recommendation at the appropriate time during debate, and a seconder then to confirm the recommendations. Members will then vote on the additional amended recommendation as necessary. Members are also reminded that due to the size of the agenda, I kindly ask all members to be mindful of this when preparing questions and comments. This is to ensure that each item receives appropriate attention and scrutiny within the available time. Should the meeting run past the constituted meeting guillotine, members will be asked to either extend the meeting or conclude the business of the agenda. We'll now move to apologies received for absence.
Thank you, Chair. There's no apologies for tonight.
Thank you. We go on to item 2 then, meetings of the meeting held on 1st July 2025. If I can ask members if they're happy for me to sign the minutes of the last meeting as a true and accurate record. Only those present at this meeting can approve the minutes. So I'm seeking... Oh, sorry. That's number 3. That's after the minutes.
Do the minutes first and then circle back.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. We'll come back to. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. So we're looking for the proposer and seconder for the minutes. We've got Councillor Gibbs and Councillor Eglin. Before we actually approve those, though, there was one on there for the minutes I wanted to raise. I did mention it. So on the minutes last meeting, we had down no apologies for people not attending. We did have a councillor who didn't attend. I did receive apologies after the meeting, but that does need to be minuted on those minutes of that fact. Other than that, if we're happy with that, we can move that one forward. So we're on to item 3 now. The declaration of interest is what I've got down. Not on the agenda. It's on my one. Let's just check this. Yeah. Okay. So we'll go on to the declaration of interest anyway. So have we got any members that have got any declarations to make at all? No one? Excellent. That's fantastic. In that case, we should be moving on to items for discussion. We're on to item 4 of the agenda, which is the carbon management plan. And I'd like to invite Jonathan Waterworth, Nicola Geary and Ian A. Church to introduce the report. I'll ask members if they have any comments, queries or concerns that they wish to raise to officers in relation to the report. Afterwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll introduce the report briefly, conscious of the agenda. The subject of this report is the Council's annual carbon management plan and the review thereof. This is a plan to tackle the Council's carbon footprint, so it's not about the wider area, it's about the actions and impact of the Council. And it also is to review the 2030 target with a review to its achievability. Attached to the report is an appendix which breaks down information in terms of the Council's impact on carbon emissions and how that's made up, particularly page 17 of the appendix. So it covers things like gas, impact of fuel, electricity, etc. And it also includes the appendix a more detailed breakdown of progress. And it shows that good progress has been made, particularly in terms of kind of foundational work to kind of carry on. However, it also indicates that based on current trajectory, we would need to reduce about 2,000 carbon dioxide tonnes equivalent per year to hit that target by 2030. And that's focusing on scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is what's in direct control of the council. And it's clear that significantly more investment is needed to reach that target. That investment is dependent on finding funding from external sources, mindful of the current kind of financial climate. So, yeah, particularly in terms of decarbonising the estate. One of the major flagship schemes, which is the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, which has supported work on the Cube, the Corby Pool and Desborough Leisure Centre, was a casualty of the June spending review. So there's uncertainty currently in terms of that flagship fund. The council officers have been working up schemes to submit to a future round of that fund, but there's currently no certainty when a future round will be, and also in terms of how that scheme may be redesigned if it's relaunched. So that inevitably will lead to kind of delays and has created uncertainty. It's unclear, say, in terms of replacement funding and when any announcements are going to be made. Obviously, lots of the investment that's been made, such as investment through funding received one through government schemes, has financial benefits. So a payback period, often it can be 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer than that, but they are sound investments, but not all. And obviously it needs front funding, it needs pump priming to put that capital investment up front, and without schemes like the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, that makes it very challenging. Based on our current forecasts, based on where we are now, potentially there will be a significant bill to offset the council's carbon emissions come 2030 if we're going to maintain that target. And we currently estimate that to be over £800,000 per annum. That figure may change, but it gives an idea in terms of where we kind of currently are. The report in front of you has 4 options. I'll just run through them briefly. The first option is maintain the current approach, do nothing, maintain the current target of 2030, noting the financial and operational implications. The second is to remove the current 2030 target and continue progress on the carbon management plan, but aligning with the statutory government target for the nation of 2050, which is currently 2050, and to continue to monitor and review progress on the carbon management plan. Option 3 is to push back the target to 2040 and look to reprofile some of the actions in the carbon management plan to hit a revised target, so put it back 10 years. And option 4 is to abandon a target date altogether, including delivery of the carbon management plan. The recommended option, which is considered by executive, is option 2. That's seen as a pragmatic way forward for the reasons outlined in paragraph 2.5 and 5.6, in particular of the report. It doesn't involve stopping the work, because a lot of that work is delivering well. It will deliver savings. But what it does propose is not to do everything at any cost. So it's to take kind of a prudent approach, and where there is a strong business case and savings and clear benefits, and we have the investment to deliver. But if that's not the case, it's to not deliver at that time until it becomes a viable and prudent investment to make. That's all I was going to say in introduction. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll open this up then to the floor for questions. Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Ian. You said at the beginning that in order to achieve 2030, it's expected that we would need external funding sources. Are any of those guaranteed? And if they are guaranteed, what amounts are guaranteed at the moment?
We have the funding through the public sector decarbonisation scheme for the three projects which I mentioned. Beyond that, we have investment which is currently taking place to undertake surveys of the council's buildings to identify what improvements could be made and the impact of those improvements. But we don't have the funding to deliver. We don't have that certainty at the moment.
Thank you. You also mentioned it would cost £800,000 per annum in order to achieve 2030. How would that money be spent? What would it be spent on?
So that is to buy carbon credits, that cost. So that is based on our current carbon footprint. So for the 23-24 financial year, based on that 20,000 and change tons of carbon emissions, that's how much it costs to offset that total figure. So if we were to not reduce any more from the current or from last financial year, that's how much it would cost.
So to clarify, that wouldn't be a reduction in any carbon at all. That would just be offsetting it elsewhere.
It would be offsetting it completely.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Fedorovich?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It was a really great read. I really enjoyed reading and reviewing this. I would have liked to have been able to review the report and actually dig into the detail of it a little bit more rather than just note it. But obviously, we've been asked here to come today and to talk about the 2030 deadline and moving that potentially to 2050. The big thing that kind of stuck out for me was that we've got 94 actions that have been sort of agreed by the council as part of this plan, and 95% of those are on track for 2030. So to change this to it's already outlined in the report that to amend the deadline to 2050 would take councillor time, resource, taxpayer funding. To change something that's already on track is, for me, a real odd move. It's not fair also on local people. That alone and the financial implications of changing this, that doesn't even take into account the risks that this puts in terms of potential reduced investment from businesses, to see like the strategic direction of the council and where we're going, but also for in terms of like funding and things like that. That will have implications in terms of the pace that we create oven-ready bids. For instance, we were looking at getting electric bus funding from local government, from national government, that we have now put in bids for, but it's only having oven-ready bids by working proactively to try and get that inward investment that we're able to leverage that kind of funding. If we don't leverage that, other places, other counties will. So it feels like we're taking, we've brought something to council that's going to essentially cost us money to change. It's going to potentially cost us and offer risks down the line. It seems a really a problematic move, let alone all of the other sort of elements to it. I did also want to mention that Councillor Ben Williams recently went to Charnwood Council campus for a life sciences research and development centre with one of our development officers, and was talking to some of the sort of like they were sort of like a tech renewable energy research development cluster, talking up North Northamptonshire. We've got Chilveston, we've got Kettering Energy Park, we've got some really exciting things that we could champion within our area, and I think this would be a very it would sort of drive the narrative on what our priorities are, and I think that would make it very hard for those sorts of companies to take us seriously, to invest in. I know that as part of our Big 50 plan, as part of our corporate plan, tech is a really big part of our plan for the future. And I think this is a really integral part of it. So, I mean, some of the obvious things that have been mentioned in the report, the carbon offsetting thing, the sort of big bill that's been put in here, this is incredibly misleading. Like, it's a hypothetical number. It's a hypothetical for that period of time, because if we're on track for hitting 95% of our 94 actions, what is that going to look like in 2030? We don't actually know, and that number hasn't been given to us here. Moving the deadline based on an arbitrary number, which we know will not be that number in 5 years' time, seems very misguided. And we need an estimate for where we will be if we hit all of our actions. Also, there's the option of when we get down the line, 4 years' time, we can and we should reassess where we are. If we agree, no, actually, we're not going to hit those targets, and budgetary pressures mean that we cannot offset the carbon emissions, it gives us accountability. So holding us to that, I think, is a wonderful thing, and we're also already on target for it. The funding is a genuine challenge, but we know that government is changing all of the time. All of our officers in every department is watching it at every given moment. We can't make a knee-jerk reaction just because one particular bit of funding isn't here, and we know that we've been told that another bit of funding that will replace this is coming down the line. So again, it's knee-jerk. We know that funding is always going to be a challenge, but we do need to be proactive. And I think within this report, it was talking about sort of stepping things up. We do need to think about how we could do that with some local creation of funding. One of those could be other councils have used things like a carbon offsetting for local businesses created by the local councils so that businesses can feel that they are doing something and putting back into their area. It's a really great sustainable way of creating funding, but we do need to think a bit outside the box. So I am going to obviously let it out for debate, but I would also like to, at this point, propose for the first, bear with me, just going to go back up to the top of the report. Of course it's gone back, sorry. It's just gone off the page for me. So just pay it down to 11 for you. So the recommendations were option 1, to do nothing and maintain the current 2030 carbon neutral target, noting the financial and operational implications. I believe at this moment in time that we will have, obviously the funding is as a part of it with national government, but we are on target. We are on target, and the financial implications of changing at this moment could be massive, and definitely will cost our officers time and resources that we can't afford. We are so stretched with all of the work, the transformation work that's going on in this council. So I would like to propose option 1, that we maintain our current 2030, continue pushing forward with this work that's definitely benefiting local people, and I welcome any further comments. Thank you.
Can I request some feedback from those comments, please?
Yeah, certainly, Chair, and thank you for the feedback. I suppose just picking up a couple of those parts that were mentioned, I think the 95% on track in the 2030 for the 2030 date in terms of the reference to the objectives in the plan. I think it's worth bearing in mind that a lot of those actions are feasibility and investigatory actions, so there's no guarantee when we complete that we'll be able to reduce that carbon. So whilst we're saying it's on track for those, a lot of those actions aren't necessarily going to come to fruition in terms of giving us the reductions in carbon that we're looking for. So part of that is that at the moment, looking at that 2030 date and the amount that we would have to invest either in terms of council money or external funding, and how reliant we are on for that external funding, there's just no guarantee that we're going to hit that 2030 date. And by keeping that 2030 date, we're tying ourselves to either carbon credits, which is less than ideal, or putting our own money into it. And as we know, there's a lot of priorities that the council has in terms of where it invests its money at the moment.
Thanks for that. Anyone else want? Councillor Baker.
Just you've got your microphone on as well. Do you want me to go? Oh, okay.
Turn the mic off.
Sorry. No, that's okay. No need to apologise. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody, and thank you to Ian, Jonathan and Nicole for the introduction of this agenda item and the Carbon Management Plan 2024-25 report. In our view, this proposal couldn't be more timely, given that the Met Office has just reported this week that the summer period for this year has been the hottest on record, that in this summer alone, this country experienced 4 heat waves, and that these record-breaking summer temperatures had been made about 70 times more likely because of human-induced climate change. So reviewing this proposal and this agenda item is clearly very timely indeed. But in our view, we can only properly and substantively review any proposal to put back the current 2030 date if we have the relevant data to be able to do so in terms of progress, financial implications, and the consequences of any change to that date. And in our view, whilst the 24-25 report is very welcome indeed, we do not think it includes the necessary data, meaning in our view, we do agree with Councillor Fedorovich that we cannot properly review the proposal at this meeting to put back the 2030 date, as we really only have a small pool of data on carbon reductions available to us at present. For example, unless we're mistaken, there is no 2024-25 financial year data included in the 24-25 report. So we'd like to know when can we get that data, if it's possible to tell us tonight, and also what would a revised date look like if the Council carried on with existing carbon reduction measures whilst retaining carbon offsetting at the endpoint to be net zero in the same manner as intended when the 2030 date was agreed. Now, we recognise that you cannot, and nobody, as far as we're aware, can project what those offsetting costs will be in 2030. We understand that. But we need a better understanding of the financial implications of continuing with the current trajectory if we're being asked to consider changing it, and on the basis that it would be financially onerous if we didn't. And we need a better understanding of a revised date on current projections rather than just plucking the 2050 date from the air because it's the statutory net zero date for the UK as a whole. So we would like to see more up-to-date data, more proper and substantive data of the sort that I've just explained, and we'd like to ask the officers this evening when we can expect that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So to touch on the carbon footprint for the 24-25 financial year. So the carbon footprint is always calculated retroactively, meaning we always do it the financial year in arrears. So we are in the process of collating all the data. I have done a very rough calculation today. Mind, we are missing data for some buildings. The waste data needs to be checked, so we need to do some quality assurance there. But the carbon footprint is higher than it was in 23-24 by roughly 2,000 tons of carbon. So basically, we're not on track for our trajectory. We've also not hit our annual trajectory at all yet. We've been off every year. So based on those facts, our assumption is that we will not hit the 2030 deadline. Also, as Jonathan has mentioned, a lot of the activities in the CMP are more behavioral related or studies feasibility related rather than tangible carbon reductions. There are projects that fall out the back of those feasibility and studies. However, it's based on funding of us being able to carry out those activities.
And sorry, through you, Chair, if I can just add to that obviously in terms of the financial implications, that's not known. Sorry, excuse me. That's not known at the moment because it will depend on each scheme in terms of as that comes forward, what funding is available and how that looks in terms of finances and payback in terms of any potential retrofit that's undertaken to buildings or otherwise. I think that looking back is obviously is an industry standard, as Nicole said, in terms of the data. We've made that rough assessment, and I would emphasise it's a draft assessment in terms of what we're looking at for the current year. Or the one that's just gone. But I suppose with that, a lot of those savings, like the work that we're doing at the Cube, at the pool, will take some time to come through in terms of carbon savings. We're only doing the works now, so we won't see those reductions till future years. And a lot of these schemes will take years to implement, and they won't be implemented by 2030. So again, that's part of the thinking in terms of given some of these projects take years to deliver, and 2030 isn't that far away. It's keeping the momentum in terms of doing the work and keeping doing those feasibilities, and to reassure you, that's what we are still doing, so that we're ready for those funding bids when they come out, because they are competitive. They're always oversubscribed in terms of councils bidding into them, so we want to be ready with those bids to be able to secure the money. But we're so dependent on that uncertainty at the moment, we can't say for certain there is going to be enough money, external grant money, to make us to enable us to hit that 2030 target at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Howes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating, this situation, because back in 2021, we set a target with relative confidence that we were going to be able to achieve it. Appreciate things change and circumstances are now slightly different, but it does, I agree with Councillor Baker in regards to the data, and I think we need a much more refined, defined idea of the numbers in terms of what the expectation might be in terms of a reduction and the potential funding streams that were required to achieve it. But it's literally going from a 9-year plan to let's add another 20 years to the plan. And it's kind of, it does slightly feel that the deadline's not being moved slightly, it's been over trebled. In any other respect of a project, sitting around a boardroom meeting table, this would be a farce. You wouldn't be sitting there tripling timeframes. As I say, I will clarify, do appreciate that we have some uncertainty in terms of some funding, in terms of some of the schemes that projected. But, in 2021, we set a target that, with relative confidence, we felt we could achieve. Here we are a few months into a new term. We recognise that we may need to move that deadline, but this does seem a little bit like, let's add 20 years. That gives everyone loads and loads and loads of time, and we'll take our foot off the gas. So I do think that before we can make a proper considered decision in terms of the options in front of us, we ought to have a bit more target detail as to what the numbers are, because the report's great, but it doesn't really give us the core information to make an informed judgment on what would be of the options the best option. Normally this would be, we need a few more years. We've got options here of 10, 20, other than doing nothing and carrying on, which we know it's not good news, but we already know it's probably not achievable for 2030. But these options just seem like they're plucked out numbers of, let's just add 20 years and I'm sure we'll achieve it in that time frame. So yeah, a bit concerned, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I tend to agree with some of the comments, actually. It's interesting to hear that actually, even if the target is changed, the feasibility studies and everything will continue, but obviously they are subject to funding that's coming through anyway. And funding is always an issue, no matter what we do in the council. The funding changes virtually every 5 minutes within council. So why we're sort of preempting what's going to happen in the next 20 odd years, surely we can't do that. Interestingly, I'd like to know, why now? Why are we changing the date now, 4 months into a new administration? Why is that so important to do at this very moment? Why can we not suck it and see, as my grandmother used to say, further down the line, in a couple of years' time, appreciate where we are then, understand more about the funding that's out there, and review it again? My worry here is that we make a decision to fundamentally change the target date by 20 years at this early stage, when we could do it in a couple of years' time and maybe have more data or have more, certainly more information that would allow us then to make a more measured decision as to whether it is 10 or 20 years or something along those lines. That's what worries me. It seems like we've just decided we're going to do something, and we've come up with as much data as we possibly can, but actually it's not all there, and that worries me, that we are rushing into. I'm not saying that it necessarily shouldn't happen, but without the data and without the time to be able to collate that data, I think this is a premature decision, and I would certainly support at least getting further data before any decision on this is made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask for some feedback for the two comments there, and then we'll move to Councillor Levermore.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. So firstly, as officers, we welcome the scrutiny and the challenge that's being posed to us in this particular report this evening. It has been, I think explanations have been given with regards to the data. And a lot of the work that has already been said that we're doing at the moment, we won't know the outcomes and the data of that until that work has been completed, and we've had a full cycle of a year to understand the impact that's then going to have both on carbon reduction and also energy efficiency and financial savings as well, which a number of these schemes will also provide us. As Mr. Waterworth has also said, that a number of the works that we're still planning to do are more around feasibility, and should future funding pots of money become available through the different avenues that may be open to us, then absolutely as a council we would apply for those. There are a number of options in the paper, which, and clearly it is for scrutiny to determine those options and consider what they feel is the most appropriate one. I think as officers we're being prudent, and also we're using this annual cycle of reporting. So we always usually report at this time for the carbon management plan. So it's usually about this time of year, September, that we report on this. And it was also taken in discussion as well with the administration as well to consider the wider policy in the round, which is what we've done as officers, and also to look at the affordability to the council over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Hence the recommendation that's been put forward, or the preferred option that's been put forward before members this evening.
Thank you. If you go to Councillor Levermore.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on some of those comments. So, Councillor Howes, you were saying, sitting around a boardroom talking about any projects that are ongoing. Any project always has three things: money, time, and resource. Now, when we look at the current time frame where we are, and we're 5 years away from 2030, we don't have time. We certainly don't have the resource. And if we look at the numbers that are coming through recently for our projected overspend, I don't think we have the money either. So there has to be a grown-up conversation around where this should go. And to Councillor Baker, we're asking about and I think Councillor Vidal-Rich also, when it comes to an arbitrary date, you could argue that 2030 is also an arbitrary date. Given where we are, where we looked at the baseline, and the report is actually very good. Yes, it was missing the 23-24 data, but we now know why, which is a good explanation. But where we should be for 23-24, we should now be 25% below where we were last year, which was flat to the previous year. Now, hearing the data that's provisional, we're 33% higher than we were last year. So that's a big miss, 133% on top of the current year. How we seem to think that the old mechanics of 18,000, I think it was at the time, divided by 9 years, so let's reduce 2,000 per year. In fairness, that's as rudimentary as it can get for a calculation. There's potentially, I would say, no science around that, so there was an argument that there's little data and potentially no science around the 2050 date, but again, it's arbitrary. At least it gives us the time, helps us get more resource, and we can concentrate on delivering what we need to achieve, but not breaking the bank and breaking council in the current term. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we can come to Councillor Gibbs, then I'll come to you, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose a question for the whole forum, if anybody wants to answer this, but I want to zoom out a little bit and just ask the question, why? I mean, all of the dates presented here are arbitrary. You know, there's not enough science, there's not enough data to back up any of these dates and give a guaranteed we will hit net zero by any of these dates. And what we're looking at here is not reducing emissions, we're not reducing carbon, we're just putting them somewhere else. And carbon isn't static, so whether we move that carbon to somewhere else in the country or somewhere else in the world, the carbon's still going to be there. So hypothetically, Northamptonshire goes net zero by 2030, 2050, whatever. So what? What happened? What's been achieved? If anybody has an answer for that, I'm all ears.
Okay, so we'll come to Councillor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for responding to my questions. And maybe I can respond in a second to Councillor Gibbs with a question as an answer, so apologies for that in advance. Just to respond to Councillor Livermore, I didn't mention the 2050 date because it's an arbitrary date. I mentioned it simply because it's been picked out, because it's the statutory date that's in place for the UK as a whole. That's why I mentioned it. But like Councillor Howell and Councillor Howes, I'm also a bit nonplussed as to why the 2030 date was set with relative confidence in 2021 and why, after just a few months of this administration, we're now looking at a recommendation to put it back by 20 years. Not by 5 years, not by 10 years, by 20 years. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't recommend in due course to put it back at all, but we have a responsibility to properly scrutinise this proposal on an informed basis. This is such an important agenda item. I'd like to respond to Councillor Gibbs by asking a question, and that is, what is the downside of going away, keeping this on our agenda, considering if we have more up-to-date data that can be provided, and bringing it back for future consideration? What is the downside of doing that? That is a question I would like answered, Chair.
Thanks for that. If we can go back to one of the officers with regards to those last couple of points.
So with regards to the data, so if this committee is asking for more data, what we would have to do is wait 12 months to see the impact of the work that is currently in place and the work that will be in place, and come back with fresh data. So we'll be back in 12 months' time. There's no additional data. We've followed the same approach this year as we have in the previous 2 years in terms of measuring our carbon net figure that is detailed in the carbon management plan. So as an officer, if you're asking, can this come back with further data, my answer to that is yes, it can come back with further data, but that will probably be in 12 months' time when we will be reporting anyway on the following year's carbon management plan. That's not me being awkward. I'm just explaining that's the data that we've got in front of us, and that's the next set of data will be in 12 months' time. I think the other thing to mention is, as each year has progressed with the carbon management plan, we've tried to tighten up where our baseline figure is, and we've also introduced Scope 3 as well into the overall carbon footprint. Now that's good practice to introduce Scope 3, because therefore that encourages us as an organisation to work with our providers to encourage them to reduce their carbon footprint, and that's clearly something that we can do through influence, through policy, through procurement, etc. And that's something we will continue to do. But again, that will take time as we go through this process. So again, our Scope 3 reflects that. It reflects the more detailed and granular assessment that we've been able to do in the last 12 months, and we'll continue to do that and continue to refine that over the next 12 months. But I couldn't sit here today and say if we brought something back in 3 months' time, whether there'd be any specific fresh data. I'm just being very honest with the committee this evening. Thank you.
Thanks for that. If we go to...
It's okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair. I'll let you come back on your comments, but I really want to kind of wrap up really some of the thoughts that I think I'm feeling in the room. But fellow Councillor Livermore comments about 2030 being an arbitrary date. In 2021, we were arguing that 2025 should be the date, and we're here now. and we're seeing the impact in the heat waves that we're having. We know that things are changing. Like you say, it is an arbitrary date, but the dates do matter to a degree, because, I mean, I wanted to give one particular example. Denmark set their date for transitioning away from EVs to 2025, and now they are 80% EVs. They are one of the cleanest transport nations in the world, and it's because of their deadline. It's because they stuck to their guns, and it's because they were ambitious with it. And 2030, I didn't think was ambitious enough in 2021, and we're now here. So I think we do need to hold ourselves to account. We need to stick with this deadline. I think bringing it back in a year sounds like a very good option, because it gives us more data. It means that we can have a bit more clarity on where we are with funding. But I actually want to put forward a couple of suggestions. I actually think that we potentially need a scrutiny working group on this. And that would be something that I'd like to recommend tonight, or just put forward for further discussion now, or at another point, however the best process is for that. But opportunities can and should be explored with this. We need to be thinking outside the box. We probably need more heads on this, looking at various different options. One particular example, like I work in solar, that's my disclosing interests, but I do think that we have some huge opportunities for solar with council buildings that we don't necessarily have to pay for. There are fantastic schemes out there working with PPA partnerships, or the Big Solar Cooperative. Like, they are fantastic schemes. We do not have to pay for everything, but it's leveraging the expertise that we've got within this council. It's leveraging the expertise within our community, asking for help more. We have got an ambitious target, but I think we should try and get close to it. And if we really are struggling, I think we should review this in 4 years' time, if I'm perfectly honest. I think we should keep reviewing this every year, but in 4 years' time, review if that deadline is realistic, and then we actually reassess then. But that's my sort of proposal, is that I think we need a working group to dig into this in more detail, because I think that's what we should be doing in these scrutiny meetings, not talking about dates. And also, just a question, carbon literacy, I don't know if that's due to come forward. That's our climate change training that we're rolling out to the council. I know lots of council officers have been trained, lots of prior members were trained. That was just really a question, when that's due to come forward, and if it would be possible for members of this panel just to at least get that training before we discuss this again. I mean, it's a year away, so hopefully that would be possible to do.
Councillor House?
Yeah, just a couple of points. It really feels to me like the priority of the carbon neutrality of the council is just literally dropped off a cliff, and it's no longer a priority. The usual scenario on this would be that we would try to come up with a deadline date of when we want to hit this in terms of a priority, and then work on a basis of how we're going to achieve it. Given all the difficulties of the funding and the resources and all that sort of stuff, we all probably around the table understand how a project is run. So it's a case of coming up with the plan of how we're going to hit that deadline, and what the option B is and C is when option A might fail. So it does feel like that this is no longer a priority. And if that's the case, I think somebody needs to just say, this isn't a priority for the council anymore, because we're all arguing about deadline dates. I'm going back to the data that Councillor Baker mentioned. I mean, Mr. Candler's highlighted the cycles of the historical data that we go through, which is a 12-month cycle. And therefore, in 3 months' time, he's going to struggle to come back with any meaningful historical data. Well, that's one set of data, and perhaps we shouldn't be doing 12-month cycles, but if we are going to continue to do 12-month cycles, I accept historical data is going to be difficult from where we're at today, if we get the 23-24 figures. However, what about the priorities in terms of the data, in terms of the achievability, in terms of the schemes, the funding streams, etc., etc.? It doesn't feel, I'll go back to my original point, it does not feel anymore that this is a priority and we're going to kick the can down the road. We're going to come up with a figure that takes the heat out of the situation. Nobody's got to do anything significant for the next few years. And that's what it feels like. And Well, yes. So, I just think the elephant in the room is that this is no longer a priority. And rather than just say it, we're all faffing around with a magical date in time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If I can come back to the officers for a response, please.
Sure, just picking up on a couple of those. So the suggestion around a scrutiny working group, I think, is for the committee to consider in terms of whether that's something they'd want to recommend. But just to give you some reassurance around that point around solar organisations, we have investigated some of them over the years, and often with those sort of arrangements, you're entering into a lease, so they, you're giving it part of your properties as a lease and they take the benefit, but I understand then they're putting the investment in, but we're missing out on some of that potential financial benefit in terms of some of those routes, but I'm, there are options though that we can still explore. I think in terms of the point around carbon literacy, there's a good one. There are options, so we could either look at delivering some of that in-house, or there is an option where the local government association deliver training for members as well on carbon literacy. So again, that's something that we're happy to share the details on in terms of if it is of interest to members to undertake.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would really like to go back to my question that I asked previously. Why now? Why are we looking to change the date now and not in a couple of years' time when we've got more information coming down the line? A straightforward question. Thank you.
I think Mr. Candler mentioned that this is part of our review. So that as part of the annual cycle, we come back to the executive with that review of progress. And as you can see, we're not making the level of reductions to hit that 2030 date at the moment, which is in part why we're bringing it here.
So through you, Chair, if I may, I understand the annual review, but what we're being asked here to do is change a date. That's not part of an annual review. That's asking us to change a date or to approve changing a date. Having an annual review where we look at all of the data and decide if we're meeting the targets and what we can do to mitigate any issues that we have if we're not meeting the targets is one thing. But actually asking for this committee to approve this paper to go forward to the executive to change a date is totally different as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. So I think the report articulates that there are a range of options in there for scrutiny, and I think this has been a really healthy scrutiny discussion with regards to that. And clearly, it's far be it for me to tell what scrutiny need to do, but there will be, a summing up and a recommendation that scrutiny will want to make back to the executive next week. And clearly it's in the gift of this committee to determine what that recommendation may be. I think with regards to those options, I think they have been articulated in the report. I think there is a strong commitment to continue with the carbon management plan, as you'll see in that paper. I think good progress has been made collectively over since 2021 and will continue to do so over the next few years as well. And clearly as officers, we will continue to explore external funding sources to ensure that we can take some of these feasibility studies that are in train at the moment and turn those into action, as we've done successfully, for example, in this building and Corby Swimming Pool as a couple of examples. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'd like to thank the officers for attending tonight and for the report. I think we have to bring this to a close at this stage, mindful of time. I think as the scrutiny committee, we're going to need to make a decision here tonight as to if we're going to accept any of the 4 options that the officers are proposing, or of course there's the additional option that Councillor Fedorovich has raised. 2 seconds.
Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Fedorich.
Sorry, Chair, just to wrap up as well, because I did also make a couple of other recommendations or suggestions. I don't know really the process of that. We've obviously had quite a lengthy debate already on this item, so I don't know whether that needs to come back as another very small item or something like that. For instance, have a scrutiny working group, or if that can be agreed offline. That's genuinely a question to officers. And also the question that we could recommend that members on this panel get the carbon literacy training before the next meeting, just so that they can be informed more on the topic. Obviously, people can make the choice if they want to do that, but I think it would just be good to be offered. But yes, happy, as I said, to propose the option 1.
Councillor Howell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we've got some listed suggestions for proposals, and I think it would be really useful if we looked at those options there and decided if either one or all of those were relevant here tonight and how we are going to take them forward as recommendations to the executive. Personally, I think that they're all very good recommendations, but the final one, that the Place and Environment Scrutiny recommends that the executive defer the decision on the carbon management plan until relevant up-to-date data is made available and further scrutiny has taken place. I would suggest that we add something to that, stating that we would like to see a full year's worth of data at least, so that we can make an informed decision on the direction in which this council is travelling in relation to the carbon management plan. And at that point, we'll have over a year's worth of data, and a new administration will be able to look at that data and decide. And, maybe when it comes back to us, we all are then in agreement that we need to move the goalposts. But at this moment in time, 4 months into a new administration, to move the goalposts now, I think, is really premature. And I'm happy to propose that recommendation, Chair.
So based on what Councillor Howell's just suggested there, do we have a seconder for that motion? So we've got Councillor Baker to second that.
Either.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So we've got the 4 original options from the report, and now we've got the one that has just been raised and seconded now.
That one there. Oh, sorry.
So the proposal that is being raised then is that the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee recommend to the Executive that the decision in relation to the carbon management plan be deferred in order for additional data to be reviewed and scrutinised at an appropriate time. And the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee recommend to the Scrutiny Management Board that a working group be constituted in order to review the carbon management plan and work therefore. And members of the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee receive the carbon literacy training.
Actually, Chair, through you, I think it was the second one of those to a later date. I think I stated that at least with 12 months full data, so possibly a whole year. So in 12 months' time, I would suggest, because if the annual review is in September, in 12 months' time, it comes back, we look at the data, and then rather than making a quick decision today, we look at the full data and we're able to give a measured view on whether this council should change that date. Sorry. Callum, I'm sure we'll be able to put that in a more succinct form. Thank you.
Councillor Baker, quickly before.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question to seek clarification, and I fully and wholeheartedly support Councillor Howe's additional proposed recommendation, given that I just seconded it. But we're talking about updated and additional data, and I've mentioned different aspects of data that I think we need to see, and Councillor Fedorovich and others have mentioned other data too, and we've had responses in that regard. But I'm just wondering, in terms of going ahead, how we interact with the officers to ensure that either we have that additional data that we've requested, or we get a proper answer from the officers in real time as to why that data can't be provided. I'd just like a clarification, please, Chair, through you, as to how we have that ongoing interaction with the officers in that regard, so that we're not sat here in 12 months' time and we have a similar debate, and I say, well, hold on a second here, I was actually expecting to have this data in order to be properly informed, to properly scrutinise this proposal, and we don't have it. I'm just wondering how we interact going ahead with the officers to make sure we're not in that position. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fedorovich.
Just in relation to this point, this is exactly what I was thinking. And that's kind of why I've actually suggested the scrutiny working group, because I do think we need to have, however long that works, even if it's a task and finish, I think it needs to be clear what the outcomes are, what data we need, and that might also need a bit of headspace for members to get work through that. So I thoroughly support that.
Okay, so we'll go to a vote on the amended proposal.
To include that, yeah, absolutely.
To include that,
Thank
yeah,
you.
absolutely. So if we can open the vote on that. So everyone that's in favour of the recommendation that we've just discussed, please show of hands. And anyone against? So that's 4 for and 4 against. Which leaves that with me. Based on what we've heard tonight from the officers and from reading the report, personally for myself, I am in favour of the recommended option. So I'm going to vote against the amended recommendation that's just come forward from the Scrutiny Committee. So I'm against. Based on that, that means we would then come back to the officer's recommendation, which was option 2, to remove the current 2030 target and continue to progress the CMP aligning with the prevailing UK statutory target to be net zero, currently being 2050. So we will go to a vote. Just before the vote, we'll have a comment from Councillor Fedorovich.
If we're moving to look at other options, I would absolutely suggest considering that half of the room has voted to keep the deadline the same. I would very much be looking at least to option 3, because to move it by 20 years, we've already discussed in a business sense of any kind of project deadline and timeline is a joke. Moving it by 20 years is an absolute joke. And the members of the public who will be watching what this council does will be very, very shocked to hear about this. I think option 3 at very least, and we hopefully come back and review it in a year. I'm proposing that. Thank you.
Do we have a second for that option? Absolutely.
Sorry, can I just a quick question, obviously based on, obviously we're not now asking for any further data to come forward whatsoever. We're just saying that everything that we've received is fantastic, we're happy to move the deadline, we're happy to do all of that. What assurances do we have from the officers these new deadlines are going to be met? Thank you.
The carbon management plan would continue to be reviewed on an annual basis, based on what I've heard tonight from the officers. If I can get clarification on that, please.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Eglin.
It's not like we're planning to take the foot off the pedal on going carbon neutral. We just can't keep making up excuses. We can't afford this. We need to be realistic and have common sense.
Councillor Howell.
Sorry, I'm not aware that we've done the budget for the next 25 years, quite frankly. So you can't say that that is the case. You know, I mean, if we'd gone through the budget setting process, I'd understand. Let's not forget that this past year, this year's budget has been set. So I would be very cautious as to what you're saying about budgets, because we set the budgets, don't forget.
Yeah, and look where that got you.
Chair,
Councillor
might I just ask, so there were multiple parts of that recommendation. Have they been, I think it probably would have been more pertinent to vote on things individually, because I got a sense from the room that there was actually more generic support for different parts of that, and I'm now unclear as to whether we are even recommending a working group, which we've just all discussed we kind of need for looking at the data and understanding what we bring forward for next year. So would it be possible to vote at least on the very specific recommendations that I have put forward, to see where we are in the room on that, and then we can actually know where we stand on that, and then we can get back to the, I presume we were actually voting on the 2030 predominantly.
Only on the basis of that's the recommendation from the officers. But yeah, I'm happy to open a vote separately first of all, if you'd prefer that to.
Yes, if I can propose for the scrutiny working group as just its own item, if anyone else would like to second that, and then we can just see where the feeling is in the room. Thank you.
Chair, but we've already voted on that. It was part of the recommendation. We voted. Are you saying now that we've got to vote separately on that item when we've already just voted on it?
The item as a whole was voted on, all three. Councillor Fedorowicz is now seeking to split the recommendation specifically for the scrutiny working group, if I understand that correctly. Councillor Howes.
Well, I'm quite happy to second it, because it's eminently sensible to look at it. These, you know, I know we're kind of debating this, but these numbers are just so arbitrary. We have no idea. I mean, clearly we're going to probably hit 2050 more than we are 2040, but these numbers are just meaningless. It just literally, we have no plan that sets out, we'll absolutely nail that date or the other option date. You know, what's the difference between the two options in terms of the ramifications? We have not got this information. This is just literally pick a number out of the air and we'll try and get to it. 25 years. I mean, if we wanted to hit it, I'm sure we could hit it quicker than that. But we've got nothing to tell us whether we will or won't. But I would happily second it, because it would put some more emphasis on it.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a proposer and a seconder for a separate scrutiny group. So I'm just going to summarise that. So the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee recommend to the Scrutiny Management Board that a working group be constituted in order to review the carbon management plan and work therefore. So we'll open a vote on that separate part. So all in favour, if I could have a show of hands, please. So we've got 4 and all against. Okay, so again, that's a 4-all vote. So based on what's been said there, it's 4-all. So again, I've got a casting vote on that one. I would like to see a scrutiny working group to further analyse this. So I'm 4 on that. So that still leaves us with needing a decision on the actual options that have been brought by the council. The council recommendation was option 2. That's why we'll vote on that one first. But obviously we've got the option to come back to the other council recommended options as well afterwards.
Before we make an irreversible decision that will negatively impact investment into this area, which I'm reticent to do, and I've tried very hard to not get into the risks that this poses and that everyone in this room knows it poses, we voted en masse on those last recommendations, and it was clear where the votes lied. That's why I asked if we could do that. And we've now split those out again. If we'd have split that first initial vote, I don't know if the councillors would have just voted if we split out the 2030, if that makes sense. Because we put in carbon literacy, the working group, and 2030 all in one. And I'm not clear what people voted specifically on the 2030 date. And I would request that be clear, because I would like to know what councillors in the room think. And I think people would at home.
Okay, thank you. The vote that we had originally wasn't for 2030 though, was it? That's one of the other options. Let me just reread what we voted on. So the original vote was that was recommended to the executive that the decision in relation to the carbon management plan be deferred in order for additional data. So there was no specific relation to 2030 on that one. So we've still got the option one, which was sticking with 2030 to come to. So we'll go through the four options that are only starting with option 2 because that's what the officers are recommending.
Thank you very much.
So if I can open up a vote for option 2, deferring the plan, the carbon plan until 2050, as per officer's recommendation. All in favour, please show of hands. And those against, please show hands.
You have to be against.
Any abstainees? So based on the vote, that carries as 4. So we will be taking up the officer's recommendation of option 2 of deferring to 2050. So to clarify on that, that is option 2, the recommendation from the officers, with the additional recommendation of setting up the scrutiny working group. And with that item closing, we can now, Councillor Baker.
Sorry, Chair, apologies for taking the floor again. Can I just ask for a clarification, please? It's not in relation to the decision just taken. It's in respect of how the response from George to my question earlier will be minuted, because I think it's really important. I asked the question, what would be the financial downside of deferring this decision for 12 months? If I translate George's response correctly, it's that there would be no financial downside to this council of deferring the decision for another 12 months. If my understanding is correct, I would like that minuted in the minutes of this meeting, Chair, please. Thank you.
Can I get you to clarify on that, please, Mr. Candler?
Can you repeat that, please? Through you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Could you move the microphone as well so it's in front of... Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, George. Thank you, Chair. My question was, what is the financial downside to the council of deferring this decision for another 12 months? I understood your response to be that there would be no financial downside to the council if that decision was taken. And I'm asking through you, Chair, for a clarification as to whether that was your response.
So I'm considering this in the round over a 4-year medium-term financial plan, which would take us through to 2029-30, and very close to the date that we currently have set and is currently the current decision of this council. And so what I am saying is, and why that recommendation or for consideration is there, is taking that in the round and looking slightly more longer term and knowing what we know, that there is a risk to this council financially at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I don't really know how to respond to that, but I think I would have to say that the answer that was provided doesn't answer the question that I asked. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. It's all minuted and recorded anyway, so we can read back on that afterwards. We're going to move on to item 5 then on the agenda, anti-social behaviour policy. I'd like to invite Kerry Pennell, Assistant Director, Communities and Leisure, to introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Chair. North Northamptonshire Council has powers under the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014 to investigate complaints and incidents of antisocial behaviour and take action to help find resolutions to the problems being experienced. The antisocial behaviour powers are statutory, and exercising those powers can lead to enforcement action. Therefore, it is critical that our approaches are uniform, transparent and wholly based on the test of evidence presented and investigated. It's critical that the Council has a consistent approach in the execution of these powers, and it's clear to residents and stakeholders about what we will do and when. This has been captured in the new policy being presented to Executive next week and being presented to the Scrutiny Committee today for comment. Prior to the establishment of North Northamptonshire Council, the former district and borough councils had different antisocial behaviour policies and service standards in place. The development of this policy for North Northamptonshire Council has been informed by those earlier policies, but also has looked at the current arrangements we have in place. Community safety partners have been engaged in the drafting of this policy. The Council utilises antisocial behaviour powers across a number of services, for example, the community safety team, housing landlord services, waste services, environmental protection and planning enforcement. And therefore we need to have a consistent approach when we tackle antisocial behaviour. So this policy covers how we respond to and investigate complaints and incidents, the things we can investigate and act on according to the legislation, and the things that are not considered to be antisocial behaviour. We recognise in this policy that where individual service areas must consider other primary legislation or statutory powers when dealing with antisocial behaviour. So whilst this policy tries to capture things in the round, there are other statutory responsibilities that specific services may have. So it's important to be aware of that. The focus when we deal with complaints of antisocial behaviour is about early and preventative action. So a range of tools are available to help us with this, such as informal warnings to both or one or both of the parties involved, but more serious antisocial behaviour or a continuation of antisocial behaviour after warnings have been given can be addressed by various enforcement actions, such as community protection notices. But we have to follow an incremental approach, so we would have to give a warning formally before serving a community protection notice. And then if that protection notice is breached, the Council can consider taking action through the courts, which is also comes under our council-wide enforcement policy. So this policy should be read in conjunction with that one. And that sort of enforcement action can result in people getting fixed penalty notices or a criminal record. A lot of the work to tackle complex antisocial behaviour cases relies on effective partnership working with the police and other organisations such as registered housing providers, social care teams and health professionals, probation, fire and rescue and the Children's Trust. So we work very much in partnership in order to get to successful resolution, and we have a range of successful partnership arrangements in place to support this, both in terms of looking at antisocial behaviour that happens in hotspot locations, but also looking at complex antisocial behaviour cases as a partnership to see what different resources that different partners can bring to the table to help resolve an issue. Public consultation has taken place on this policy between the 16th of June this year and the 10th of August. There were 143 responses in total to the consultation. Overall, the feedback was mainly positive. The majority of individuals that completed the questionnaire agreed with the aims of the policy and how the council will investigate antisocial behaviour, and also the part of the policy that talks about what the council expects from the complainant as well. So it is proposed that once approved and adopted, we do some work with our wider stakeholder groups, such as housing tenants, community groups, and those with protected characteristics, to make sure that we can produce an accessible version of the policy to put onto our website. So that concludes the introduction to the report and the policy. So I will open it for questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the report and for your introduction. I'll open it up to the meeting for any comments or questions. Councillor Florridge.
I shall come in. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the report. Yes, I know this is quite a big topic as well, and I think there were some, well, generally I think the policy is really good. I've looked through myself. I do think it's covered off quite a lot of really good good strategies for unifying like the approach on this. Some things that I was going to sort of bring up was things about key performance indicators and how we can kind of measure the impact of this and it reducing incidents over the years. We obviously, that's the aim of this. Also potentially linking in, I know we already do that, but formalising that potentially in the policy, but our work interlinking with other areas such as sort of youth diversion, mediation schemes, things like that. Also, having sort of some public transparency on this might be helpful. I know I don't know, I couldn't find anything here about sort of like annual reporting on it. I don't know if that's something that would then just like regularly come back to this committee, but that might be something just to sort of include. But I think it's really just a case of how do we know that this is working? How do we know that this is improving things? And I'd like to have a bit more transparency on that. And I think also this has gone out to consultation, but my other concern is how do we, 143 people is good for an online survey, but I know that we could do better with consultation, and I think it's more just a case of making it accessible for people, because we know every voice that we hear is helping us do things better, and there are so many voices we know we're not hearing. It's great that you're taking them out to like housing panels. I guess it's knowing more about some of those panels that we could take it to and going to where people are that will be helpful. But I don't know if there's something more that we can do with regards to consultation, if there could be something that's offline perhaps. I don't know if that already exists. I know some people just cannot do online. So I don't know if that's something, we obviously regularly send things out to our housing, our tenants. So if there's something that could be worked into that as an ongoing feedback on this potentially, I know we can only ever get so much, but or if the next time we do a consultation, if we can consider what else could be done, or if we could get other organisations to champion this a little bit. I still feel like that we need to ask more of our town and parish councils and ask if they can champion things. And if we asked all of our town and parish councils to try and get 50, 100 responses and give it to them as a bit of a challenge and see who could get the most, I think that could be quite a fun way of incentivising people to engage with these sorts of processes. But I'm sure there'll be more things that crop up, but I'll let people speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you like to come back on that?
Yes, so in terms of sort of monitoring the application or the implementation of the policy, there is an enforcement group that sits at officer level that brings the different services together. So we would use that group of officers to look at how it's working in practice and what the challenges, if any, or the learning from the use of the policy, because we will obviously, like all policies, review it on an annual basis. In terms of KPIs, it's an interesting one. We do, from a community safety perspective, report in the corporate performance about the antisocial behaviour levels that are reported to the council, and then also customer satisfaction in terms of resolution or successful resolution of those. What we've recognised through developing this policy at the moment is that we don't necessarily collate all the data around antisocial behaviour that's reported into all the different teams that deal with it and say what does it look as a single as a single picture. And so I've raised that with the performance team to see whether we can start doing that. I'm sure we all collect the data as services, but how do we pull that together to show a picture? So I think that's something that we will take forward. In terms of that ongoing engagement, I think whilst we definitely get feedback from the customers that we deal with under we will deal with under this policy, and again we can do that across the service areas. So that will inform moving forward. We did engage with housing tenants in the development of this policy already. Yes, I agree. There's sort of lots more that we could do, but it's also about making sure that engagement is meaningful at the time. And probably the best way to do it is to get that engagement and feedback from people who've actually been been through the process to see how it's worked for them. Thank you.
Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Kerry, and thank you very much for your comprehensive report as usual. I think it's really important to highlight, and I'm sure you will agree, especially with your background, that the partnership working is really key to ensuring that this policy is enforced, and I think that's really important. So around that, how do you work to develop those relationships with those partners and to ensure that actually the internal reporting is robust enough? And also, are there any gaps, do you think, or challenges that you might need to overcome? Another point is about who does what and how do we relay that information to our residents as to which service they should be getting in touch with, depending on the level of antisocial behaviour, i.e. if it's a housing issue, it's with this council. If it's somebody causing an affray outside, it's a police issue. So how are we going to get that message across? And also, I think it's really important that our residents are able to make anonymous calls if they are in fear of repercussions or anything along those lines. You'll be well aware of the Crime Stoppers number, which the police use regularly, which is anonymous, and they're able to collate all that data, and they create then a picture of where those problem areas are. And I'd like to see something along those lines in this, so that our residents don't feel intimidated about being able to report antisocial behaviour, because the more we know about it, the more we can do something about it in conjunction with our partners. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. You're right, partnership working is key. So whilst this is the council's policy for how we will respond to antisocial behaviour, not surprisingly, is a priority for the North Northampton Community Safety Partnership. We're currently in the process of refreshing the Community Safety Plan, and not surprisingly, antisocial behaviour will be one of the key priorities for the partnership moving forward. So there are a number of ways that we jointly work together, as I alluded to. So some of that is about identification of hotspot locations where there's ongoing issues, and then sometimes that means that if we need a quick response, that a working group is set up immediately to look at the issue, but we also have a regular monthly meeting where that is done as well, and sometimes those sorts of issues get raised at our local area partnerships or place-based partnerships. So I think there is lots of mechanisms for hearing from across partners about what the challenges are, and then there are also mechanisms to sort of build that into formal problem solving and tasking processes. And then when any particular agency is dealing with an antisocial behaviour case, whether it's one of our services or whether it's the police or it's a housing provider, we have groups that meet regularly called HASBAGs, which deal with antisocial behaviour and hate crime issues. And that's where complex cases are brought and can be discussed as a partnership. And alluding to, or picking up on what Councillor Fedorovich said, it's not just the statutory partners that can have a role to play, because somebody might be experiencing Antisocial behaviour is often a symptom of other things, and therefore we need to make sure that there is wraparound support in place for the victim, but sometimes also for the alleged perpetrator as well. So that's all considered in those meetings. In terms of, I think, picking up on your point about how do we make sure that our residents know what to report to whom, we did some communications that the leader sent out quite recently, but we have talked about, as this policy goes through and gets adopted, working with the Community Safety Partnership to do a wider campaign across all the partners to promote to the public how they can report antisocial behaviour, where they can report it to. Some matters fit more neatly with the police than they do with the council. I mean, in a way, it shouldn't really matter where the public report it. It's up for us then to work in partnership to make sure that that information gets to the right place. But whilst we do some of that already, there's obviously more that we can do to strengthen those relationships. Anonymous reporting, yes, is important. So again, as part of that campaign, we need to keep pushing the use of Crime Stoppers. The police, things can be reported on the police website that can be done anonymously as well, but people might be reluctant to do that. So I think part of that campaign, we should keep pushing Crime Stoppers. Thank you.
Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Chair. This is a brilliant report. I'm very much in favour of it. Believe it or not, I do actually agree with 99% of what Councillor Fedorowicz just said, and I'm glad she actually turned up for this meeting. I'm sure she'll see that online. My question was around the survey undertaken, the 143 responses. Do we have any demographic breakdown of the types of people that responded to the survey?
I'm sure we do, because we capture that. I don't have it with me, but there will be a consultation report that sort of sits behind any of the consultations that we do. So I'm sure that we do have that data, and I can make it available if the committee would like me to do that.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and likewise, thank you very much, Kerry, for the introduction of this very comprehensive report and the updated antisocial behaviour policy, in which the paper rightly highlights is an important toolkit for the Council in guiding services across antisocial behaviour, because it's a cross-departmental matter, as you rightly indicated. However, the policy is only one element of that toolkit, albeit a guiding one, but recognising ultimately, in terms of addressing antisocial behaviour, the most important element is, of course, enforcement. And it is on enforcement that we believe we would benefit from more data as a scrutiny committee. And listening to your introduction, Kerry, forgive me if I was mistaken, but you mentioned there's an internal working group within the council looking at enforcement. If that is the case, are you able to give us an idea this evening as to what sort of enforcement data that working group receives, and whether data that it does receive is of the sort that this scrutiny committee could receive at a future date? I'm particularly interested in enforcement of PSPOs. We have a PSPO in my ward since 2014 in Wellingborough, and there are serious concerns that it is either not being enforced or there are not the resources to enforce it properly. An additional point in talking about partnership working, this matter also, of course, cuts across the police, and with reference to the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, I'm wondering if we can take this opportunity to perhaps invite our first external party to a future meeting of this scrutiny committee and to scrutinise enforcement data and enforcement issues with the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner present. And if I could put that out there for consideration to the scrutiny committee, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It is one element, the policy, I suppose, provides the framework for a toolkit which has a range of things within it, right from prevention, early engagement, both with the victim and the alleged perpetrator, but also right through to enforcement. In terms of the enforcement data, I think, as I alluded to earlier, the challenge at the moment is that data will be collected across a number of service areas, and I think there's something we need to do as a set of officers to pull that together. So I couldn't couldn't tell you tonight, for example, what enforcement data is being discussed at the enforcement group, but I'm happy obviously to take that away and discuss that with that group. As I've already alluded to, I'm talking to the performance team about how we can collate that, and once we've done that, I'm sure that there will be a data set that can come to this committee at a future date. In terms of, so you mentioned PSPOs as a sort of example. PSPOs are a good tool in our armoury. They are there primarily as an education and engagement tool, so that's what we do, but we also have the ability to enforce if we need to for persistent breaches of PSPOs. I think it isn't a secret to say that we have struggled a little bit with resourcing around community safety in the round, and we do work closely already with the police, so we don't singularly enforce PSPOs. It is a joint activity. We are currently recruiting to a couple of extra staff that we've had Home Office money for under the Safer Streets campaign that will give us more boots on the ground as such in terms of visibility, particularly for PSPO enforcement in our town centres. But in the round, we're also looking at our community safety resource more broadly and in the longer term to see what can be achieved. Now, even if you have more people patrolling the streets, those people, we're never going to have enough people to have somebody in every place every time. So we need to be quite astute and use data and intelligence, which is why reporting and encouraging the public to report is really important. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. And thank you very much, Kay, for that substantive response. It's just one question in reply. You mentioned additional funding that's coming through in order to put more boots on the ground in relation to enforcement officers. Are you able to give us any idea as to how many enforcement officers that would equate to?
So the funding that we've received from the Home Office this year is only enough for us to recruit 2 extra staff, which I say is not going to mean that there's going to be people everywhere. But there's also funding. The bulk of the funding has gone to the police. So the police are using that to pay additional overtime and additional police resources in our hotspot areas.
Councillor Florich.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I wasn't requesting a thing with my throat. I've actually got a bit of a cough. Sorry. Thank you very much for all of the additional information. There were a couple of things that did crop up as we were discussing things. One of which, just very quickly on consultations, I think I've possibly mentioned it before, but I don't know if it just could be noted. For consultations to maybe improve things, I have requested on a couple of other, or made suggestions that potentially like a video. Video does tend to be a way that a lot of people nowadays consume content and find it a lot easier to understand information. But officers who are working on this, who could potentially do a 2 to 4, 5 minute summary of a piece could be very, very helpful, I think, to a lot of people, especially like visually impaired as well. So it could help make this a lot more accessible to different residents. I did also have a note about sort of escalation pathways, and time frames were a little bit vague as well. I didn't know if that was something that we could tighten up a little bit. And also timescales for responding and closing cases was something I originally noted further down in my notes, so a KPI that could be helpful for knowing that we're actually servicing our sort of complaints and things that come in. I actually really did think that our section on dealing with sort of vexatious complaints as well was a really good thing, because we also need to protect officers, and I'm very conscious of that as well. Obviously, Councillor Baker has really hit on the other main thing that people are probably most concerned about, which is things like ASB in our towns that we're seeing. We have seen a massive increase, I would say, in the last few years, and that's probably due to a number of factors, due to reduced youth funding. We've had increase in mental health issues and street drinking, but enforcement in the town centres used to be something that well, prior to the Unitary Authority, we had that in Kettering. We had a town centre warden that went around. And now, due to the unitary move that was supposed to save us money, local people in Kettering are seeing a reduction in services. And they are now seeing a town centre that does not feel safe without this service. People are scared to go into town. I have older individuals who have had to take refuge in shops because there are people walking down the streets shouting and being very aggressive and quite intimidating. It changes people's perception of the place and where they live. And ASB impacts us in such a really deep way, and the repercussions of one incident that can be then spread on social media and can really detrimentally impact our town centres and the investment and the difficulties our businesses are seeing. ASB is at the heart of that. Our town centre wardens is kind of part of that, and I know that resourcing is a challenge. I have been talking to other councils, and Luton is one that has a neighbourhood enforcement scheme that was predominantly set up by community members who recognised this was an issue. They got trained as wardens, and then they helped increase the capacity. I've mentioned this to a couple of officers, but I kind of wanted to note it here because I think it is something we need to look at potentially, whether that's a relevant scheme to us or not. There are potentially other options, and local people care. They really do care about this sort of thing. And street watch is something that has obviously has hit quite a nerve with quite a lot of people, but potentially there could be an escalated version of that, I potentially think. So just in terms of resources, this is what's happening on the ground and how it's impacting people. And I think if we can really look at the resourcing, it could make a massive difference. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we are definitely looking at resourcing. I can't sort of give you any guarantees about what that may or may not look like yet. And I also think it's important to note, as we've said already, that we have to look at it as this is a partnership problem. It's not just the council's issue, and it is a priority for the community safety partnership. And so, things like having more visible patrols on the ground. Yes, the council, if funding wasn't an option, could provide that, but we may or may not be in that position. Obviously, the police have some responsibility. There are other schemes, as you've alluded to, and so as part of our resourcing from a council perspective, but also as part of the new community safety plan, we'll be looking in the round about what best we can achieve and deliver best value for our communities. It isn't always just about flooding an area with lots more people. As I say, it is about using intelligence. But town centres, I get, people do want to feel safe in town centres. We want people to feel safe in town centres. I'm hoping, and it's early days, that there will be some positive outputs from the extra resource that has been that has been there through the summer months. There will be some data sets that the Police Crime Commissioner's Office are collating from across the partnership in relation to that piece of work in the main town centres, and that will probably be available from sort of October onwards. So linking back to the suggestion about whether there was an external party might be brought in, that might be something to consider around that Safer Streets campaign that's run or is running currently. Thank you.
Just one sort of thing that I thought of as we were discussing this as well was town and parish councils, and if we could potentially, if we already have some routes to discuss this with them and raise this with them as a potential, as you say, like partnership working. I know in Kettering Town Council we are looking at security, so if that might be something that, I know that there's a regular town and parish meetings, and I don't know if that might be a useful suggestion to take that to them and pose it as a question and see if local people are, or local town and parish, almost certainly local town and parish councils are thinking about this. And it might be the case that there could be some clever partnership working there, or just supporting or doing some connecting there, because often they don't always feel like they have the resources or the connections to do what they need to do, but they might have the funding, so that might be helpful.
Yes, happy to put that on the agenda for the next forum. Thank you.
Okay, it seems like we're pretty much covered for this one. So it'll be worthwhile, if we've got anyone with any recommendations. We've got Councillor Baker, who has who recommended earlier that the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee requests that additional information and data be provided members of the Scrutiny Committee in relation to enforcement, and that the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee requests that the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner attend a future meeting or briefing about this. Have we got a seconder for that? Councillor Howell. Perfect. So we'll go straight to vote on that one. If all in favour of that recommendation, can show hands. Yeah, that's unanimous. That's perfect. Thank you. All right. Obviously, with the length of time the first item on the agenda took, we really need to consider whether we're going to extend the guillotine for this and finish off the last two items on the agenda, or if we're going to bring the business to a close. So I think we need to take a vote on whether we're happy to extend the time to cover the last two items. So we've got a proposer and a seconder for extending the time to tonight's meeting. We've got, thank you, perfect, thank you.
Happy to propose.
Propose and second from Councillor Lovemore. Okay, all in favour of extending and finishing off the business, please. That's unanimous, that's perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, on that basis, we might want to take a quick 5-minute comfort break for anyone that wants to, and then we'll come on to the last two items, if we're happy with that. So if we can prepare to get going again, please, everyone. If we can prepare to carry on, please, everyone. Okay, thank you, everyone. If we can carry on with the agenda with item 6, this is the Zero-Emission Bus Scheme. I'd like to invite Councillor Jim Hakewell and thank him for his patience for how long it's taken to get to this item, to address the committee. You have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you, Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chairman. I can't remember the last time I sat so still without saying anything. It was very good. Chairman, I should probably declare a couple of interests in this particular item. I live in Braybrook, which is on one of the proposed routes for the electric buses. And I also have an NCC bus pass, so I could use these buses too, to travel on public transport. So very pleased to see this report coming forward for scrutiny, and I hope after tonight's debate that this committee will send this proposal to the Executive Committee with a really positive recommendation. I'm very pleased to see the routes will serve Rothwell, so I'm being parochial there, in particular, and give an emissions-free service between Kettering, Rothwell, Desborough, Corby and Market Harborough. Extremely pleased to see that. I'm also pleased, as Chair of Corporate Scrutiny, Chairman, to see that this is coming, it is in and coming out of the General Fund Capital Programme, which often finds difficulty in being spent. So it's good to get this money in, it's good to get this money out. The charging infrastructure is naturally built into this standalone project, but I hope its success will mean that Stagecoach can implement further services in the future to make greater use of the installed infrastructure. In relation to 7.7.1 Equality Impact Assessment, I drive an electric car, Chairman and Committee, and I have done over the past decade and now covered something like 100,000 miles in electric vehicles, without the concerns of silent operation, which that particular paragraph brings up, people not being able to hear the car coming, or the bus. The driver is responsible for recognising potential dangers and acting accordingly, clearly. In electric cars, there is a sound system that cuts in below 18 miles an hour. And is that something that through scrutiny or through discussion can be or should be fitted on buses? My car groans a little as it gets to that sort of speed. Finally, the Council has invested in a new footpath from Braybrook to Market Harborough, which means that people wishing to walk the footpath will be able to have a zero-emissions bus journey to the footpath from the towns and villages along the route. A really positive step, if you'll excuse the pun, forwards. I'd like to thank officer colleagues for creating this innovative service, and thank you for letting me come and speak to you. Really positive.
Thanks, Councillor Hakewell. So if I could now invite Graham Kane and Chris Ragg to introduce the item, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm ably supported, as you mentioned, Chair, by Chris, who's led on this project. So credit goes to him in terms of work behind of this. So as you've heard some of already, the Council's been awarded 2.589 million of bus service improvement plan capital funding for 2025-26 by the Department for Transport. Emphasise this is capital funding, so it can't be used for revenue services like running the services themselves. It needs to be spent on buying assets, in this case vehicles. It's proposed that an allocation of 1.8 million of this total allocation from DFT is put towards the introduction of electric buses on a priority route and also towards the depot infrastructure to charge those said buses. The intention is to introduce 8 electric buses on Stagecoach services 17, 18 and 19, which link Hamwood Park, Kettering, Rothwell and Desborough, with some services extended to Corby and Market Harborough. The intention is for the council to fund 75% of the additional cost of electric vehicles compared to the conventional diesel vehicles, while the operator funds the remaining 25% of the additional cost and the equivalent cost of new diesel buses, as well as we're contributing towards the charging infrastructure, as well as you've heard already. And there's a table in the report to set that out for those who like to see it set out in numbers. The agreement will include appropriate provision to ensure that buses are only used within, or used on the routes, I should say, because they do cross the border, of course, used on the North Northamptonshire routes. It's anticipated the electric buses will enter service by autumn 2026. And the proposal is, of course, in line with the current Council's bus service improvement plan, which is drawn up in 2024, which originally envisaged electric buses being funded from a previous government initiative summarised as ZEBRA, Zero-Emission Buses Regional Area Scheme. However, we understand the government is not proposing to have a second ZEBRA scheme, so we don't believe there'll be an opportunity in the future to bid into ZEBRA, and government have gone along the way of providing bulk allocations, and then the council can decide how to apply those bulk allocations, which is what we're proposing here. And I think with that, Chair, that is a summary of the proposal, but of course, Chris and I are more than happy to take any questions should the committee wish. Thank you.
Thanks for that, and I'll open up to the floor.
Yeah, you'll expect me to talk on this one. So no, thank you. Thank you very much, Graham, for introducing that, and thank you very much, Councillor Ragg, not Councillor Ragg, Chris, for all of your for all of your hard work on this. I really appreciate it. I did want to note as well, so obviously we've tried to bid on ZEBRA electric funding before, and this we weren't necessarily successful, but obviously this puts us in a much better position, as sort of outlined, to win similar funding as and when that sort of comes down the line. You'll be surprised to hear that I'm actually going to query this. So appreciating that buses, okay, sorry, I've got different notes here. I think the thing that I wanted to say was, whilst obviously we are putting in a substantial chunk to support Stagecoach to get this, and I very much do support the work that's going on here, what I want to kind of question is there either other funding, or I've seen the allocations in the tables that of how much we are putting in versus Stagecoach. Obviously, this is a private company, and they have a monopoly in North Northamptonshire. I think people would like to see Stagecoach expanding some of their bus routes, and having this sort of support from the council is very, very useful. But what I kind of want to challenge is how much we're putting towards this. And I think it's on a very practical level of the reasons why I'm saying this is we have certain parts of the community that are not being serviced by this, by our buses. One particular example, there's a village that has a bus that comes at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. That is it. And it's kind of a question of, can we look at this in a more holistic way of potentially not putting all of our funding towards this, or looking at if we have other funding to support some electric shuttles that could be piloted. If we reduced our contribution here from 75% to 63.5%, we would have enough funding for 4 electric shuttles that could service some of the areas in North Northamptonshire that are completely left behind right now. And in terms of our bus provision, which is what we are here to scrutinise, our bus provision is not working, and they have the complete monopoly on it. So I actually kind of would like to maybe, with officers' consent, I'd like you to potentially take this back to Stagecoach and discuss if we could maybe discuss those percentages, or maybe discuss if we have some other funding that could look at some electric shuttles to go alongside this work, because not only would that help with the electric infrastructure that we're putting in there, but I think also, for instance, in that example where we've got bus services that aren't really servicing our residents in the right way, potentially cutting that route and replacing that with a shuttle and re-looking at where that resource goes so that we can actually make sure that some of the areas that need to be covered by buses do so, and then we can cover that with shuttles elsewhere. So it's quite a bit of a unexpected curveball, sorry. But I think we do need to be discussing other options. Is what we've got at the moment working? Is this a good time to potentially challenge that a little bit and see, could we utilise our capital funding in a smarter way, in collaboration, of course, with Stagecoach and our partners? Thank you.
Thanks. Through you, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll make some comments and then pass over to Chris for some of the detail. But you're right, again, to mention the Zebra scheme. And the construction of how we've done the funding here is based on the Zebra scheme, on the basis that government proposed that as part of their Zebra initiative, and therefore we thought, well, that's sensible, we'll follow the same structure because it's been tried and tested by government. So that's where the proportions come from. In terms of extending services, and Chris can talk more about the detail here, but instead we totally agree as officers that there's more that the council would obviously like to do and can do around extending bus services and the network thereof. The running of those buses is, of course, revenue funding, so we can't use this capital funding to run those services, so we can't use it for, say, staffing, or in this case, electric, but in other cases, diesel and maintenance those vehicles, etc., etc. So we wouldn't be able to use this funding for that. However, we also have, from the Department for Transport, revenue funding for extending bus services, and so we are looking at that as well. And at that point, I'll hand over to Chris to see if he wants to add any more meat to those bones.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, I mean, what I'd add, in terms of revenue funding, one of the challenges has been that we've had significant grant funding for 1 year at a time. And in doing, in running a bus service, the last thing you want to be doing is introducing a service and withdrawing it 12 months later because you've got no money. So one of the things I am impatiently waiting for is our revenue funding allocations, which will hopefully be for the next 3 years, so 26, 27, 27, 28 and 28, 29, which should give us some medium-term certainty about how much funding we've got and allow us to look what then we can afford to do and what the best way of doing that is. And I can anticipate being at this meeting, at a future meeting, discussing our proposals for doing that. The other thing I'd add is two things. In terms of sort of the percentages, those have been agreed. Stagecoach have put their proposal forward on the base of those percentages. So if we change the percentages, the deal may not work because that increases our their investment. And also we do, if we were to apply conditions, you must do this, if we do that, that can get into difficulties with the subsidy control requirements as well. Thanks.
Might I just come back to clarify? I think more probably what I was getting at was if we could, it has to be led by yourselves and officers who have the knowledge and this is a negotiation potentially, and I don't think it would be something to put in conditions. It would be a case of this is what we're looking at and having that kind of holistic approach. I do appreciate that it's nuanced, and that would really be something that would have to be led by yourselves. But yeah, it's helpful to know about the sort of revenue funding for the next sort of 3 years. And yes, I'll let other councillors come in.
Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the point of Stagecoach and the 25% deal, were any other alternative bus companies considered before reaching that agreement?
Yes, Councillor, through you, Chair. We did ask other operators if they were interested. None were, but it's worth saying there are no other operators with substantial operations most of the other operators are operators from outside coming in, or the community transport operators. There's no other operator who actually has 6 buses worth of, which is actually the number operating each day out of these 8, operating in Northamptonshire.
Councillor Howell.
Thank you. Excuse me one moment. Thank you. Thank you very much for your report. A couple of questions, if I may. Why were the services 17 to 19 selected over higher patronage routes such as the X4, and why this route? I mean, ultimately, because that's not massively rural. I mean, we have a huge, going back to what Councillor Fedorovich was saying, we have a really, really rural area, some seriously large rural areas in Northamptonshire that continuously get left out, you know, and we have a lot of older residents who live in those rural areas who literally can't get anywhere. So firstly, why that route? Secondly, when we're looking at replacements and upgrading and upkeep and maintenance and things, has that been taken into account with the funding, or will that be an on-cost moving forward? Also, the council, when we look at planning applications and Section 106, a lot of the Section 106 we're able to apply for funded bus routes through Section 106, and I'm very aware of when Rushden Lakes was built, part of that programme didn't allow for any bus routes from my town, Raunds. So the town council agreed with the Section 106 officers that we could use Section 106 monies to fund additional bus service to bring it up to a viable position so that the bus company could take it on board. So whilst you're talking about capital funding and that you can only utilise it for buying the buses and not for revenue for running the buses, is Section 106 something else that could be utilised in that? And also, my final question, so by delaying the carbon management plan, what impact is that going to have on the possibility of rolling out further schemes, not taking into account any funding opportunities that might come, but if we're kicking the can down the road constantly, what impact's that going to have on increasing our electric bus supply in and around Northamptonshire? Thank you.
So thank you again. I'll make some comments and allow Chris to go into any of the details you may wish. So Section 106 funding, yes, that can be used to run services, so it can be used for revenue and is used in many cases, as you cite there, Councillor Howe, quite rightly. So that is an opportunity that we utilise already. In terms of the revenue that we also get from DFT, we are using that to introduce other routes, particularly for the rural networks, because you quite rightly say some of them are obviously more isolated by their nature, and those routes are not usually commercially viable. So therefore an operator won't opt to run those routes themselves, and therefore they look to the council to subsidise those, which we can do using Section 106, as you quite rightly say, or indeed from the revenue funding that we get from DFT. And as Chris mentions, there's some limitations around doing that, but we do that. In terms of maintenance, that will also sit with Stagecoach. So these vehicles are being bought by Stagecoach, and therefore they will own them. They will be responsible for maintaining them, responsible for making sure that they're up and running, and all the ongoing costs associated with them. In terms of choosing the routes, I'll leave Chris to handle that one if you like. In terms of the carbon management plan, we would bring forward proposals to the council, and they can make decisions as to whether they want to implement them. Like this one, it's an individual project that stands alone, so whether there's a carbon management plan and whether there's a net zero target is something for councillors to consider alongside of this, but it wouldn't prevent us from bringing forward similar proposals in the future.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate Chris has kind of come back about the routes. On that carbon management plan, obviously, so I appreciate what you're saying, that they come in as and when the funding becomes available, but will we be producing the feasibility studies to enable us to apply for that funding if we are knocking the target back? Will we still be pushing for the creation of an electric bus force throughout the whole of Northamptonshire? Thank you.
Thanks. So obviously that decision will be for the executive members to make, but from our point of view, we've got a bus services improvement plan, which has a number of different initiatives within it already, and we will carry on with that bus service improvement plan. Some of those obviously have an environmental benefit, some of them have societal benefits, and so forth. So we will continue with the bus service improvement plan that we've got at the moment.
Yep, go ahead, Councillor Davies. Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
So, thank you, Chair. In terms of why this route was chosen, since we'd put in the previous Zebra bid for the X4 route, Stagecoach in particular, because they're the operator, have gained more experience of electric buses elsewhere and how they perform through the variety of weathers you get, and particularly how the batteries perform in colder weather. And basically the problem is that the combination of the physical route length of the X4 running from Northampton to Peterborough and the long days that those buses work mean that the buses couldn't work that route on a single charge, which would mean you'd have to have more buses sat in the depot to come out later in the day, which wouldn't be economic for them to do that, to have effectively extra buses sitting around to do that. So that's the challenge. So this route was chosen because it works, and it's had to say it's not, it's close to the, because it's got an evening service, it's close to the operational limits, but it's within those operational limits, so Stagecoach are comfortable that it should work. And the other thing that I think is relevant, which sort of alludes to what Graham said, is that bus operators do tend to invest in new vehicles on their most profitable routes for obvious reasons. And so this is a route Stagecoach, were willing from their part to put money into. And it is one of our more frequent routes.
So pretty much we're saying that Stagecoach have dictated to us that this is the route that they want to go down. Is that what you're saying? For a number of reasons, albeit that they can recharge their vehicles. I mean, I also have an electric vehicle and I've run one for about 15 years now. So, and there are rapid chargers out there that can do it fairly quickly. I appreciate we're talking about a bus and not a car, so there could be a slight delay, but often these buses have downtime, don't they, where they're sitting around waiting or, but if we're looking at putting the infrastructure in as well, are we just saying that this is, Stagecoach have dictated this route basically? Thank you.
No, officers have worked with Stagecoach to identify a route where this will work and be successful operationally. Obviously, there's many things to consider, as Chris has already said. Clearly, the timetable is one. So, unlike a private vehicle, we need to make sure, a Stagecoach in this case, needs to make sure that the electric vehicles are ready for service in line with the timetable. So they have to bear in mind the charge of the battery and how long it would take to recharge. And of course, these buses, unlike a private vehicle, these buses would have to recharge at the depot, so they couldn't sort of pop into the local fueling station and charge up there. So there are some limitations in terms of how these buses operate. So we've worked with Stagecoach to identify a route that is suitable for this initiative, one that we have confidence that we'll be able to deliver, because of course this is a significant allocation of funding from the council, albeit it's originated from the Department for Transport. It's a considerable allocation for the council, so we want reassurance that it will be successful. Obviously Stagecoach want reassurance that it's successful because they are also making a significant investment, and both parties want to make sure that residents can benefit from this service. So it's been very carefully selected with officers and Stagecoach involved.
Just one last, sorry. So those limitations aren't going to go away. So basically what we're saying is if the routes don't work, we won't be able to service them through electric vehicles? Or are we saying that at some point we're going to have to put some more infrastructure in?
When it comes to electric vehicles, I'm absolutely certain that we'll have to put some more infrastructure in. When I say we, I mean us as a country. Whether that's funded privately or publicly, it will have to go in one way or the other. So at this point in time, we are working with a certain set of constraints. Those constraints may well change in time, in which case we will review the situation. But as it happens today, this is the proposal that's on the table based on what we know today. But will it change in the future? I'm certain it will.
I've got one question. I've got two EVs at home, and one's £1.30 to charge, and you get 220 miles. It doesn't do 220 miles, though, that's for sure. In the cold, it goes nowhere near that. So when you say about infrastructure to charge a bus, I dread to think how many amps you're going to have to pull to do that. But will somebody be doing a cost comparison with regards to this is how much a diesel costs to run to do these routes as opposed to an electric? Because if it's a lucrative thing for Stagecoach, you're quite right, then why aren't we putting on additional services? If it's not, then we can come back and say, well, actually, it wasn't as cost effective as we thought, and, you know, a diesel bus is half the price, and that might be the route that we stick with, maybe. But will these costs be monitored?
I think we'd all be very interested in that calculation. So obviously Stagecoach and ourselves would have worked through that already. Stagecoach will have worked out the operational ongoing costs, because as I said, they are liable for them, so they are interested in that already. But we will certainly be interested in working with Stagecoach to understand that more. I'm quite sure that when government set up the Zebra scheme in the first place, part of that is, of course, government pump priming for what is still innovative practice, innovative in that, you know, companies by themselves aren't necessarily going to invest in this yet because there's lots of unknowns. So one of the benefits of doing this is that we can learn alongside Stagecoach and then see, a bit like Councillor Howell was saying about other constraints, understand how those other constraints can be managed differently as we go forward. So yes, we will be interested in learning all the things that you've just mentioned, comparing the ongoing costs between diesel and electric, amongst other things, including, as you say, the demand on the infrastructure, because it's all very well having enough infrastructure for, say, 8 vehicles in this case, but as others were suggesting, if the long-term aim, which we would hope it would be, is to introduce more vehicles, then how can that be accommodated within the depot that they have? So this is all part of the learning experience for all parties.
EVs obviously cost more, and I bought one because it was tax exempt. It's not tax exempt anymore. I could go into London for free as of December. It's not going to be free. So, you know, the pros and the cons, but they are cheap to run.
Councillor Eglin.
If the routes do become viable, will they be, because I run an electric car as well and have done for about a year now, it's cheap to run. Does that mean the prices on the fares will come down, or will they keep the money from the fares and just make money out of that, even though we put 75% in?
There's no direct link in the agreement between fares and the funding, so that would be a commercial decision for Stagecoach amongst all their other operating costs as they go forward as well.
So we're pretty much going back to what Councillor Howell just said. They're dictating to us.
Stagecoach set the fares for their services. There is no link between this funding and the fares that they offer to residents.
Just a couple of questions for myself, if I may. Just on regards to the buses at the moment, so the plan is for these 8 electric buses to replace current fleet. The current fleet, is that end-of-life buses, or can they still be utilised within North Northants Council to fulfil some of the areas that are lacking in bus service?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What tends to happen is when new vehicles are introduced, they replace some not quite so new vehicles, which some replace some a bit older vehicles, and at the bottom of the fleet, the oldest vehicles, or sometimes if there's problems with particular vehicles, which can be reliability, it can be bodywork failure and things, they are the ones that leave the fleet. So you tend within it, and because I'm interested in these things, I observe this, where, that bus used to be working that route, it's now working that one. So they tend to cascade within the local business, but also because Stagecoach are a national business, they do ultimately manage their fleet nationally. So it's sometimes about balancing the age of a particular fleet as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eglin?
Just thought what just came to my mind when you were talking about the difference in the new fleet and the old fleet. What's stopping them in a year's time turning around and saying, no, that bus isn't working there, we're going to move it over to Leicester?
Yeah, so thanks. Through you, Chair. That is where there will be a requirement in the agreement for the buses. That's one of the things we've got to agree as part of the detailed negotiations. But it's also worth bearing in mind that if Stagecoach they're investing 25% of the charging infrastructure, so they're going to want to get some value out of that investment as well.
So thank you. So are we saying actually the deal isn't actually done yet? This is just it. There are issues left to be ironed out, shall we say?
Well, the deal's certainly not done, no, because we don't have approval yet from executive to do that. So we would obviously, if executive supported the proposal, we would then work out the details of the final contract with Stagecoach, which is not uncommon, as you'll all be aware, to get the agreement from executive in principle, and then for us to work out the details appropriately after that. So that's the stage where we are at. Obviously, there's a balance between making sure that we understand, in this case, Stagecoach, but any party we're going to work with, that they want to continue to work through the proposal, and then we obviously bring it for agreement to executive or otherwise. So if executive agree to it, we will then go away and finalise the final contract with Stagecoach along the lines that we've outlined.
So it's an agreement in principle as such from the executive, and then there's no scrutiny follow-up on the actual deal because we're scrutinising it prior to the deal, in effect.
Through you, Chair's Scrutiny Committee, as far as I'm aware, can choose to scrutinise any aspect of the Council's business. I will take advice from the monitoring officer as to how far that stretches, but if the Scrutiny Committee wanted to look at this again in the future, that's within your remit to call that in.
I was just interested to understand the process, to be fair. Thank you.
So through you, Chair, it's obviously not uncommon for this approach to be taken when we bring a proposal to scrutiny. The proposal would go on to executive, and then the executive would make a decision, but they might delegate the final signing of the agreement and the contract to, say, the executive director in consultation with the executive member. So that's a very common process, and that's exactly the process we're taking here, Chair.
I think just to confirm, I mean, obviously I've mentioned about sort of like electric shuttles. I think that's just a thing to throw in the mix there. And really, I don't think we need to necessarily make a recommendation in terms of the negotiations. I think that's just a thing to hopefully note for officers. But I do just want to say, I think it is important that we start to do these sorts of projects, that we start to invest. I appreciate, Councillor, how that the routes might not be perfect and it's not servicing, as you say, some of the routes that really need help. And that's, I think that's probably the dichotomy of the challenge that we've got here is that we're investing in the routes that aren't the ones that necessarily need it from the perspective of the people outside. But I think it's also, we have to deal with the business as a partnership. We have to make these first steps, but we potentially, if we could haggle them down a little bit and use some of that funding to service some of those areas, even one or two of some of the worst hit areas, it would be a start. And I think it's a start for getting that future funding to then help those areas. So yeah, happy to support the recommendation.
Nothing else? Okay, so it's worth noting the officer recommendations are to note the contents. So do we have any additional recommendations on behalf of members for the scrutiny, or are we happy to note this? Councillor Howell?
So again, actually, excuse me, through the questioning strategy that we had, there was a proposal to resolve that the Place and Scrutiny Committee, Place and Environment Scrutiny should be, Committee recommends that officers should establish clear performance metrics to evaluate the impact of the electric buses, including increase in bus patronage, reduction in carbon emissions. apparently. Improvements in air quality and community satisfaction levels. So I think we should, that was a recommendation that came through. I think we should agree on that, Chair.
Does anyone second that proposal? Councillor Howes?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I know I'm a little bit late. I'm mulling this over. I have to say, it does feel a little bit like this deal it isn't a great deal for residents or the local council. In summary, the state is capital funding 75% of a private company's fleet. We're not getting a great deal for in terms of an additional element to the deal. I appreciate that we are continuously funding this sector, but it does feel like the deal isn't great.
Just to jump in quickly on what you're commenting there, it is only 75% of the additional costs.
Yeah, I know, but obviously comments have been made around the room in terms of different aspects of, is it the right routes? Could we get additional routes? Blah 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 blah. It does feel that we've got a chunk of money. We're giving it to Stage. We're giving 75% to Stagecoach. They're funding 25%. If I'm Stagecoach, I'd be absolutely delighted with this situation. The state of funding 3/4. It doesn't feel like we're getting enough out of this. It's just my observation.
Just an actual thought on that. Ongoing funding is always something that we're struggling with. And we've also just noted the fact that we want to support them to purchase these vehicles, but that it will reduce their costs. And it might be interesting to take that into the conversation of, if we're paying for the considerable part of that, the savings that come from, I know that this is a service that really does need propping up. So I think that's something also to consider. But I think what we're feeling in the room is that some negotiations and maybe using this as a little bit of leverage for those conversations would be helpful. But I don't feel I'm informed enough on behind the scenes to dictate that percentage. I don't think that's right. I don't feel that as a member, but I do think that that's echoing your comments, sir.
Do we know the cost of the bus?
So through you, to answer that question, yes, we do, because the proposal here is based on how much those 8 vehicles will cost, and then the proportion of funding from both parties is being allocated based on the cost of the buses and the cost of the infrastructure. So yes, we do know that. So a bit more context, which might help to address some of the thoughts in the room. Obviously, government came up originally with the Zebra scheme, which was exactly what this is proposing, which is government funding to incentivise private companies, commercial companies, to adopt new innovative technology, in this case electric vehicles. So the government had an objective to encourage private bus companies to adopt electric vehicles for the environmental benefits, obviously, not just carbon emissions, but also air quality. So that would be particulate matters and other things that cause health issues with our population. So that was the intention behind the Zebra scheme. The funding that is proposed now is not limited to electric buses. However, in our bus service improvement plan, there is a commitment, an intention, an objective to introduce electric buses. And so this funding enables the council to deliver against that objective in the bus services improvement plan to introduce electric buses. So is this the government subsidising through the council private enterprise to introduce electric buses? Yes, that's exactly what it is. The benefit would be that our society begins to adopt more electric vehicles, in this case public buses. So that is the benefit. The Stagecoach obviously has an investment it needs to make as well, albeit not 100% because it is subsidised. That's absolutely the case. But it still has an investment. So it still has a financial contribution it needs to make, in which case as a commercial enterprise it will be looking for a way in which that financial contribution can be repaid to itself through its operation. So it will be looking to recoup those costs of its investment one way or the other. So we can absolutely continue to have those conversations, and this is again, the learning that both parties can do and the benefit of having a partnership with an ongoing partnership with another organisation, in this case a bus company, to understand the financial pros and cons for the operator. So what would incentivise them in the future to adopt more electric vehicles? What level of subsidy, if any, do they require in the future to adopt more electric vehicles? That's all part of the learning of this particular project. But you're right, this is government subsidy to incentivise the adoption of electric vehicles for the environmental and societal benefits of doing so.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to stray into territory now that I feel is not my area of expertise by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm just reading 5.1 of the papers again, and the reference to subsidy control, previously known as state aid rules. And I noticed that in your explanations, Graham, I don't think you've mentioned that. Apologies if I'm mistaken. But in that regard, I'm reading paragraph 5.1 as though the 75%, 25% split has been done on the basis that that reduces the risk of non-compliance with state aid subsidy control rules. Is that correct? And are you saying that actually if those percentages are changed, whichever way, then there is a risk that there would be non-compliance with state aid rules? In particular, if that 75%, I guess, was increased rather than decreased. Thank you.
So thank you. Yeah, as it's clearly explained in the paper, there is subsidy control, previously known as state aid rules, to consider, and we've done that very, very carefully. As I said earlier, the proportions are based on Zebra because that was a government scheme, and therefore one would assume compliant with state aid and the rules that the government has in place. We've taken our own legal advice thus far, and they support the approach that if we adopt the Zebra approach, it seems to be an appropriate way to ensure compliance with the Act. There is, as you quite rightly say, Councillor, a risk, therefore, if we change those proportions, that we wouldn't be in complying with the Subsidy Control Act, and we would continue to get legal advice. So I can't say here and now whether it would comply or not. That would be exactly one of the things that we would discuss with our legal colleagues to ensure that we did remain compliant with that Act.
Councillor Lovemore, last one, and then we need to wrap this one up, please, everyone.
The pressure of going last. Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, so I actually agree with the particulars around the percentages. It makes sense for Northamptonshire to acquire 75% of the infrastructure, because even if there were, a loss of business, it would remain in Northamptonshire. I also agree with every 100,000 that we are contributing per bus. Stagecoach, they are contributing 250k. So there is a balance either side, one on the infrastructure side, one on the asset as the bus. So although it sounds, and there's a lot of talk around 75%, 40%, 25%, it's actually only 40% on NNC and 60% on Stagecoach. So from an outside looking in, it seems like a good opportunity for Northampton. We're getting 8 buses that are actually servicing internal town centres. It makes more sense, in my view, to have a green bus in a town centre than out in the green fields. The only stipulation that I would maybe put on those is if we are contributing 100k per bus, when it comes to, as Chris was saying, the next line of new buses coming through and what happens to these ones, if we are contributing 100k per one of those buses, then those buses should stay within Northamptonshire. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll round this up. So we had a holding recommendation earlier from Councillor Howell. Sorry, did I get a seconder on that earlier on? Yeah, I thought so. That's fine. So if we can move for a vote on that. So that's the recommendation to recommend that officers should establish clear performance metrics to evaluate the impact of the electric buses, including increase in bus patronage, reduction in carbon emissions, improvements in air quality, and community satisfaction level and progress reported back to the Scrutiny Committee. So we're opening a vote on that. So everyone in favour of that, please show hands. And that is unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. We'll close that item. Thank you for your time, officers. So if we quickly get on to the final item, and thank everyone that's patiently been waiting all night. Before we just start with that item, I would like to once more invite Councillor Jim Hakewell to address the committee. You've got 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't claim to have fully read and absorbed all the policy paperwork that's in front of us, but I wanted just to focus on one aspect of it. Page 17 of the allocations scheme talks about applicants who satisfy an established local connection. And I will say at this point, Chairman, given the time of the night, I'm very happy to talk with officer colleagues about what I'm thinking there. But just one of the things I was very proud to do in 1993 as a councillor was we got 6 houses built in Stoke Albany and Wilbarston, 3 part ownership, 3 rental. It was a section 106, and one of the most pleasurable things in my councillor career is when I met people who had been able to move to those villages to be with family, in either way, either a younger family with older parents and so on. So very proud of that, and as far as I can read in the papers, those section 106 local village connections, which is what it was predicated on, will endure. I'm going to go quickly through this because of the time. Local lettings plan, page 37 in the housing allocations scheme, 7.2 is the local lettings plan. And in relation to that, having that sort of plan would give preference to those in villages where a legal agreement is in place, as I just mentioned, but that would disadvantage people who live in villages, rural areas, where there aren't Section 106 housing on exception sites. They're just conventional council houses. What opportunities are there to consider established council housing in those other villages for people who would normally qualify but can't in their particular environment? It would be heartbreaking for families who have a rural connection but who may be forced out of a village that they have most connections with. Totally understand, Chairman, that the waiting list or the housing list is massively oversubscribed. I absolutely understand the nature of how professional colleagues are doing this. But as a councillor representing rural areas now for 40 years, you do see those situations where families are set aside or older parents can't be greeted with their children in the villages because they're just forced out of that. I'm going to miss some of this because of your time. Yeah, the other point about that is that I have experienced, and I'm sure professional colleagues have experienced, where people who are most used to living in an urban environment because we don't have the capacity in stock are moved to a rural environment and they're away from their family, their support network, unless they have a car or, dare I say, an electric or diesel bus to get from those villages to the towns and so on, that they can be a little, like a fish out of water. And that is another hard issue to actually take, whereas rural people from rural families are used to that, quote, isolation. Yeah, I'm happy to share my thoughts with professional colleagues at some other point outside of this particular meeting. And the other thing, I hope you will, as a scrutiny committee, help to make sure we promote rural exception sites. If everyone knows what a rural exception site is, it's where you can take land outside of a local plan boundary, and for a lower cost you can build affordable housing, just as we did back in '93. And I think we should promote those rural exception sites, because however they're allocated, they bring rural people to stay in their own rural villages, and I hope the committee will promote that. So thank you very much. I'll shut up now.
Thanks for that. Thank Councillor Aquil. If I could I'd like to invite Yvonne Coleman-Thomas, Emma Forbes and Samantha Dixon to introduce the report. And again, thank you for your patience. It's a long one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Aquil, I'd be happy to pick up some of the additional questions that you have there. We are going to take the report as read, colleagues, today. I have with me Samantha Dixon, who is the Housing Allocations Manager, and also Emma Forbes, who is our Head of Housing Solutions, to take you through the rationale of the presentation of the Keyways Allocations Review, the legal requirements behind it, the rationale for the proposed changes, the impact, and also very importantly the support that would be provided to applicants who were now finding themselves, if approved, removed from the current allocation list. In terms of some of the rural exception sites, we do have those would be picked up, I would expect, Councillor Aquil, through the wider housing strategy piece of work that we are doing, and also we do have some Section 106 agreements for local connection. I would just like to reiterate, though, that we don't place applicants by you're going to be moving there. Applicants bid for the areas that they wish. So we would be anticipating that applicants would have an understanding of the areas to which they would be moving to. But again, we would always support any applicants who are moving to areas where, again, they find there may be some difficulties. So on that, I'm going to hand over to Samantha Dixon, who will take you through the proposed review of the Keyways allocations process. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the report, and there is appendices. I understand that these are quite heavy documents. There's quite a few there. So the proposed scheme, we've drafted up the current scheme for you to compare to. We've also got the equalities screening assessment and the climate impact assessment. So what we're looking for is for the committee to scrutinise what our recommendations are with the Keyways review. We are looking to go to executive in October for approval to then go out to a 6-week consultation with all of our service users, partners, charities, everybody that can maybe speak for vulnerable groups, our stakeholders, our Keyways partners. They'll all be involved in the consultation. And once the consultation is completed, we would go back to executive for the final scheme to be considered with any changes that need to be made. The scheme is a framework that goes across North Northants to allocate social rented housing in this area. It's legally compliant now, and it continues to be legally compliant in the proposed scheme. We have had legal counsel review the scheme to make sure that it meets all statutory duties, regulations, case law. It outlines how we want to support households in the greatest housing need. We believe it to be coherent, fair and transparent. The housing law in the UK comprises of a broad set of statutes, which we've outlined in the report. It's quite it's low down in the report, but it covers all of those statutes and regulations, like I've said. The recommendations would be for us to scrutinise the report and then provide any written feedback for key points of consideration. With in point 3.2, what I've done is summarise the actual major changes to the scheme so that you can see them up at the top of the report, but I go into more detail further down in the report. So if I go down to section 4, what we are looking to do is make sure that the scheme continues to be fair and transparent. It outlines who's eligible and qualifies for social housing and how the council would decide how we will prioritise those properties that are available. There's no legal requirement for a council to conduct a review, but it obviously is best practice to do that. This scheme has been in place since day one, 1st of April 2021. So after 4 years, it is a good time to look at how it has been, how it's been administered, what our changing our local needs are, so that we can make sure that it is addressing all of the emergent needs and regulations and law. And the strategic priorities of the council, and making sure that it's still value for money. What the scheme will still continue to offer a priority to those households with a housing need. So in the first instance, we look at whether somebody is eligible to join the register, and then if they qualify, and then what their housing need is, and then that goes into a priority band. And at the moment, we have got 5 bands, A to E, with A being the highest priority. And then secondary to that, it's about how long somebody is in that band. So we call that an effective date. With the changes that we've suggested in the proposed scheme, we've taken in consideration other services and the pressures on those other services, such as homelessness, temporary accommodation, adult social care, NC Trust and the NHS. So we look at things like hospital discharges, people living in supported accommodation, etc., needing to move on. We go down. So the demand on the housing remains consistently high. We do have an average of over 500 new applications a month. I've put quite a lot of statistics or data into the report, so hopefully that will kind of understand why we've recommended, made the recommendations that we've put into the report. So if I go down to table of changes in 4.12 onwards, the first one is about the housing need. So this is where we are looking to remove those with no housing need from the register. They are the majority of band D and E. I've outlined that these are households that are usually sharing with others without dependents, seeking sheltered accommodation but have no housing needs, so they are already in suitable accommodation. And those who are already in suitable accommodation who have been permitted to join the register that have a local connection to a village exception site or a Section 106 site. The homeowners would be so that we would remove all homeowners. We do obviously still retain the right to look at exceptional circumstances where somebody is in an urgent housing need band. And if they are a homeowner, then we would look at exceptional circumstances such as they cannot adapt their home, they don't have the equity to sell and buy something more suitable, but that would all be on an exceptional circumstances basis. Number 3 is to address care experienced young people, so people who are in accommodation from leaving care. So this assists our, NC Trust. Us being a corporate parent, we would be looking to move those applicants up from the current band B to a new band A, giving them increased priority. It will also include in the new scheme about leaving care children who are outside of the North Northants area. New regulations were introduced to say that the local connection has been removed for all care experienced young people. So we need to determine what band that they would go in. So we are suggesting that they are in a low band D, so that we will retain the band D for those and some other criteria. But it will be that they go in there so that as a council we prioritise those that we are the corporate parent for. Very similar with number 4, adult social care. We would be looking to increase the band B, current band B, to a band A to assist adult social care on moving people out of accommodation, which is very sought after, bed blocked, and we need to be able to provide them with suitable housing via the register. Number 5, domestic abuse victims. Again, the recent regulations that came out in July said that the local connection was removed for all victims of domestic abuse. So we would be looking to award them a priority band A, where they are in a refuge in our area, or they have a secondary local connection to this area, which is deemed safe for them to return to this area should they be in a refuge outside of North Hants. Number 6 outlines a severe overcrowding band. Now that would be a new band that doesn't exist currently. We have a band C for people who require an extra bed space, and we have a band B for those who require an extra bedroom. But we are seeing more and more households that have quite severe overcrowding. So there's a very big difference between someone needing an extra bedroom, where you've got 2 children who ideally shouldn't be sharing anymore, to a family who have got 6 or 7 children living in a 3-bedroom property. And it's a very severe overcrowding that can impact the condition of the property with regards to damp and mould issues. Occupancy levels are heavily supported by the Housing Ombudsman as a contributory factor towards damp and mould. It's considered to be a category 1 hazard. So we would be looking to create a new band A for those households that have that severe overcrowding. Number 7 is best use of stock, housing prospects and manager expectations. So currently, since the start of this scheme, we have allowed single applicants to bid on up to 2-bedroom properties. So bedsit, 1-bedroom property and 2 bedrooms. They aren't successful in getting 2 bedrooms because we've got too many households that require 2 bedrooms. So what we want to do is remove that ability and just keep their bidding eligibility, property eligibility, to what it is that they are entitled to. It's best use of stock. It is, it's not what they're going to get anyway, so we just need to make a change to the scheme and to the system to stop them from being able to bid on 2 bedrooms, which they're not going to achieve. Number 8 is auto bid areas. We do have 4 auto bid areas. An auto bid area is something on the system which allows us to place certain applicants onto auto bid where the applicant doesn't need to bid and an officer doesn't bid. The system will do that for them once the cycle closes. It picks the best queue position for the properties that are advertised and it places the bid for them. What we do offer applicants at the moment is that there's a choice of 4 areas, and those were the 4 sovereign councils. We've recognised that East North Hants is very, very large in geographical area. If you look on a map, it starts from the top of Wellingborough and it kind of reaches right to the bottom of Corby. So we want to split that area into 2 sections so that an applicant has a choice of being able to pick in East North Hants North and East North Hants South, so that they have a choice to be able to decide whether they want to be closer to Wellingborough or closer to Corby. Number 9 is move on from supported accommodation. So again, there's households who reside in supported accommodation can apply to the Housing Register to be assessed and verified as having a housing need and ready for independent living. So those accepted would be placed in one of 2 bands, bands A and bands B. To enable households to move on and to provide a timely resolution, auto bid would be activated on both bands so that we can get that move on and there's no settling up of supported accommodation. That frees up accommodation for other people who actually need it. Number 10 is bids. Currently, we have a bit of a difference on the current scheme where all households can bid on 3 properties per cycle. However, homeless applicants can bid, the auto bid system bids on the top 5 properties. So what we are recommending is that it's just 5 properties for all applicants, regardless of whether you're on auto bid or not. So we understand that regarding item 1, housing need, what we've tried to provide you is with data that supports the number of applicants in bands D and E and the lower priorities who are least likely to be housed. We want to be able to concentrate and focus on providing those applicants with support on how to explore alternative housing options. We've already started to increase the Keyways website with regards to information on alternative housing options. We promote mutual exchange, low-cost home ownership, private sector accommodation, and what we want to do is try and make sure that those applicants are actually exploring options that are more realistic to them and actually have a chance of actually being leading to something rather than just sitting on a register expecting a nomination that is never going to come. So hopefully the data can break down that for you. If I jump down to... So what we've tried to anticipate is that some applicants may approach our housing advice and options service. So we are looking to increase our triage service. We work in partnership with the Keyways Housing Allocation Service, like known as Keyways. We work in partnership with Housing Advice and Options Service all the time. We have 2 new officers who are starting to work on actually applications that are owed a homeless duty. So that will increase that advice that we can give to those applicants. We've done some benchmarking with other local authorities with regards to what is in their allocation scheme. It's very apparent that large authorities like us now, they deal with those who are in housing need only, and they do not have applicants on the register who have no housing need and no prospect to be housed. It is all about providing that additional advice and assistance to explore other options. The part of the consultation will be to go out with a whole host of groups, including, like I said earlier, our partners and our charities, to make sure that we do reach those vulnerable groups. We will be emailing all of the applicants on the housing register so that they get an opportunity to see the consultation and take part. We will be we're working with the community engagement team already to actually design that consultation so that we're ready to go live. We're in talks with Civica, who is the software provider, to make the changes to the system based on these recommendations. So that will be ongoing in the background at the same time. In section 6.5, on the consultation period, we did look at dates, and what we'd be looking at is for that to expire on the 1st of December, which would mean that we would look to go back to executive in January, because we would miss the December date for that. Yeah, I think that's everything, and if you've got any questions.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the detailed introduction and the report. It was a very good read. Thank you. I'll open it up to anyone who's got any questions or points to raise. Councillor Fedorowicz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. I'm going to be as quick as I can. Consultation, great that that's sort of going out. I was actually thinking about the video comment I was making earlier, and I wonder actually if just simply a link and a timestamp for this video, this recording tonight, might just be a starting point, even if we couldn't do something else. I know, though, that we've been talking about improving these for some time. I know Yvonne, we've been talking about this as well, so it's great that it is coming forward. I think one of my comments was about managing expectations of timescales is something that I try and do a lot as a councillor, but actually some advice for councillors on advising on that would be helpful, because I'm sure obviously you have your own sort of protocols on that. I try and divert people down other routes as well, just to try and ease the system, but I think that might be something that we could maybe get a bit more guidance on. Homeowner exclusion, it is sensible in principle, but I did worry that some outright exclusion might overlook applicants with other issues such as disabilities. Obviously, it's great to know that we've got that discretion, but I didn't know if it'd be worthwhile having a bit of guidance on that discretion, not to exclude anything, but just to sort of give people outline that in a little bit more detail. We need to have the flexibility, of course, to not say it has to be on this list, all of that sort of thing. 1 bedroom restriction for singles and couples. Again, I was thinking again for exceptions for needing flexibility for disability needs and things like that. I'm sure that I'm sure that's accounted for, but I just wanted to mention it. The bid increase, so allowing up to 5 bids, I think is great, but I think it just, again, it comes back to expectations as well and managing that. If they're without parallel increase in supply and targeted allocation, it's just risking getting people frustrated, essentially, if they're still finding it difficult with an increase of refusals. So I think, kind of off the back of that, I know we are obviously looking at more affordable housing and increasing our housing locally, but I don't know if we've looked at community-led affordable housing schemes. Not something to look at today, but I just wanted to kind of raise the question, and I'd love to pick up outside of this meeting with officers on that. And I think the last real main point I wanted to make was just about the consultation depth and stakeholder inclusion in terms of probably specifically, obviously, like care leavers, domestic abuse survivors specifically as well, and making sure that we reach them, and disabled applicants. But with domestic violence, I have seen instances, even in my own area, of people being sent away from their support network. I know that some of the changes actually kind of do adapt to that a little bit, but I still have concerns that domestic victims aren't looped in enough, and I just want to make sure that I basically don't see an instance like that again, where a domestic victim is basically told you're not allowed to go there because we know best, basically, and they ended up having to go back there to take their daughter to school every day anyway. So it's kind of on that balance of just looking after people and making sure that they're part of that decision. Everything else, I think, is fine. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the important thing that we want to get across is that this is not a review to take away from people. This is a review to enhance our ability to support those residents who have the greatest housing need. So it will maintain the residency occupancy, that local connection. It will enhance our ability to focus and target support and advice and interventions to those on the highest need. It will broaden out people's geographical areas to which they can apply for, and it will also allow them to bid more. So yes, on the one hand you could say, well, they could bid 5 times and get less, but actually if they're bidding 5 times and not competing with the other 2,000 other people on the waiting list who genuinely have no prospect of being housed by us, then I think it will make that counterbalance. I think it's also important to manage people's expectation. As a local authority, whilst we are absolutely want to support people's want, the statutory and the moral duty support those in the greatest housing need at the area of risk. But what we have done to balance that is respect people's ambition, so expect people's life chances, and respect that support by offering other options. I think we have to be realistic. We're not in the place where we were probably 50, 60 years ago, where you could just walk up to the council and go, I'll have that house, please. And so we have to manage people's expectation that being provided a council house is not the only housing option in town, and neither should it be. And that's where we use the housing strategy to look at all those other stakeholders, developers, all those other options of, mutual exchange, housing options, shared ownership, to be able to support. In terms of our corporate parent role, that's one of the reasons why we are looking to support our vulnerable people leaving care to go into the higher bands, and also that criteria of helping people who, have larger properties, who are overcrowded more. There will be some exception where an individual may be able to apply for that 2-bedroom, but that has to be an exceptional. Because when we look at our data, we have hundreds of people in Band B and A who are on needing 2 bedrooms, and to continue to allow people to bid for the 1 and 2 bedrooms doesn't really help us move and support those vulnerable people, but it gives misinformation. It makes it look like you are going to get a 2-bedroom when actually you never, ever get. So I think it allows people to kind of manage their own expectation and support. In terms of the domestic violence, if the police tell us that it is unsafe for us to house someone in a geographical area, we are duty bound to support them to be in a geographical area that makes them safer. So it is very not much the situation that we are telling somebody they can't be there. We are utilising the support of the professionals who are telling us for that individual it is not currently safe for them to be housed in a particular geographical area at a particular point in time. So that does mean, and I'm aware of the case that you talk about, that household was still bringing their children into the local area for school. But what we have to counterbalance is it may be safer for that momentary inconvenience to maintain the safety of that individual and their family and not allow the perpetrator to have an exact idea of where they are living, and with working with the school and other partners to keep that family safe. So we try and look at it as much as the round, but once we become aware that it is safer for them to move back into a particular geographical area, we will support that and support that application. So really it's to say there's been, and I think you can see, a considerable amount of work and consideration that we've done here. One of the things we also, in terms of the wider housing strategies, we need to build more properties, don't we? We need to build more houses that will house people, and the housing strategy will do that. But the allocation system here will maintain those who are eligible for housing. It will maintain those in the highest need. It will allow us to allocate and put the resources into those with the greatest need, while still supporting those people who have an aspiration. It will also give us options of where somebody who is reasonably and suitably housed and has the income to be able to look at other options, whether that's buying a smaller property, downsizing, moving to a different area. It will allow them to still have those options, but not bed block or take up points within the housing allocation process for which we need to review. So we know that all of these conversations are difficult, but I fundamentally do believe that the work that colleagues have done around the legislation and listening to what our residents tell us, that this is really a positive move for us to move forward and support all. Thank you for your time, colleagues.
Councillor Howell.
Thank you, and thank you for your explanation of the very comprehensive report that you've brought forward. And I agree, long gone are the days of when school leavers could put themselves on the council housing list and at some point in their life hope to be able to get some sort of accommodation from the council. Those days are so far gone behind now. You know, it's not something we can even consider. The problem with that, obviously, is there's 3,107 individuals already that we're now going to, in effect, ask to leave the scheme. And you know, that's going to come as a big blow to them. And we do have to make sure that something is done to try and assist them in looking at alternatives, how we're going to manage that conversation around that. You know, the consultation is a great way of doing it, but are the questions we're asking in the consultation adequate enough? Because I've seen consultations before, and sometimes they're not fit for purpose, I should say. Some have before happened, and they just really aren't. So we need to make sure that that consultation actually serves a purpose from us finding out the information, but also assisting those residents who now are going to be basically booted off and have no prospect of gaining a council property. One of the issues I've seen on issue 1 with housing need, it says that obviously those sharing with others without dependents, they wouldn't be eligible to be on. Am I right? They wouldn't be eligible to be on. Worry about that is if you've got a young couple sharing with parents, and parents decide the only way that they can actually get them a property is to tell them that they're going to be made homeless, you're going to end up with them on the list anyway, or you're going to have to deal with them as a homeless prospect rather than allowing those individuals some way of getting on a list. So I think you just need to be mindful that that is probably and could end up causing a lot of friction within family units. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. I can't see any cost savings in here by reducing that number by 3,107. Would be interested to know what sort of cost savings you think you're going to make. Apart from the fact that this engagement scheme is costing £18,000, but I see you're planning to offset that with the cost of advertising on the Keyways scheme. That's quite expensive adverts for landlords, isn't it? So as I say, I think cost savings would be interested to understand. And are you sure that the Keyways advertising is going to fully offset the costs of that scheme? And as I say, taking into account the conflict that may come within families by not allowing those to be on the scheme. Thank you.
So I'll pick up the first two and then refer to colleagues. In terms of conflict, I think the reality is that's already there. We will already have young people or families, potentially being asked to move out of their accommodation. And when that happens, we have to take them through the process of Keyways of assessing their housing need. Now, it may be that you are just getting under mum and dad's feet, but actually, financially, you can afford to go privately or buy a property or what have you. So we're assessing that currently, and there will only be a percentage of those, I would anticipate, that will have such a high housing need that there may come the housing duty. But we do have a housing responsibility to assess that need and understand. Certainly, again, anybody that's currently on the waiting list, whilst we would not necessarily look at that being a cost saving, what we would be doing is reinvesting that time resource to supporting those people who are on the housing highest need, but also need other advice and interventions for us. And again, we'll be doing that wider piece of work through the housing strategy to deliver more properties and provide more options. Just in terms of the cost savings, in terms of the £18,000, I'm just going to refer that to Sam, who may have some more closer information than I do. Thank you.
Okay. So the £18,000 cost to make these changes are for the IT changes. And what we've already done is purchase that consultation package. That came out of the advertisement income that we had in last financial year. So we don't charge the council to advertise their own stock, but we do charge registered providers per advert for per nomination. They don't have to hold a housing register, they don't have to have an IT system, they don't have to have staff. They give us the adverts, we advertise it for them, we find somebody who's in housing need, we provide them with that nomination. So we're providing them with a service and we charge them for that service. That £18,000 came out of that charge, but we also had enough left over to pay for the annual cost of the system as well. So that whole income for that year was used up for the consultation package and the annual cost of running the system for the council.
I have a question. You refer to overcrowding. So for argument's sake, you've got a private tenant, a mortgage owner, and they've got 2 or 3 or 4 kids, they've outgrown a 3-bedroom house, and then they say, if they come to the council and say, we need a bigger house, they'd never get a look in because they're private, you own your property. But are you saying that if somebody has got a 3-bedroom house and they've got a lot of children, they're going to get upgraded into potentially a 4-bedroom house, and if they go into a 4-bedroom house and then have additional children, what does the council have a cut-off where they say, no, like the private sector, you've made your bed, lay in it? How does that work? Because with overcrowding, like I say, if I had 3 or 4 children and my house was only a 3-bed, that's on me. So for the Mr. and Mrs. taxpayer, and they see these large families just get into a bigger house, and then the 3,000 that have been took off the list, they're like, well, how does this work? So how does that work then? Thanks.
So the scheme is actually tenure blind. We don't actually look at what their current tenure is. We look at whether they've got a housing need. So somebody in a private sector accommodation who is overcrowded would establish a housing need and get onto the register. So they would achieve that overcrowding band. And
But
be
they have
able
an
to,
asset, so the council's going to say, you've got an asset, sell it. Go and rent a bigger house once you sold your house.
So that's a homeowner then, so not private. So a homeowner, yes, a homeowner who is overcrowded would not get on the register. We would be looking at whether they've got equity to
they've
to
made
buy.
their bed, they lay in it. That's absolutely right. But if somebody is in a council house and they have had multiple children and they've outgrown that home, the council's going to put them in a bigger house. Are they not?
If somebody is in a council property and they are now overcrowded, they would establish a housing need and get on the register to bid on larger accommodation. That is correct.
So they would be assessed with one else in terms of the housing need. I do think we have to be clear of saying that simply because you're in a council property, you're not a taxpayer, because we know that not to be true. And we also know that we have private owners who are receiving benefits. So we have to assess on housing need, and it's tenure blind. So somebody in a council property, if they are overcrowded, would go through the same assessment criteria as we would anybody private. It doesn't mean that you guarantee a larger property. But also people make their individual choices. People make individual choices to have a larger family. And we can't always accommodate that. That's sometimes some people's personal choices. We have to support them as to whether, sometimes we say, well, that means your children are going to have to share a bedroom. We have one family where actually they've got 2 different living rooms. And what we said is that one of those living rooms for a period of time will have to double up as your bedroom because you've still got living space. So we will always try and support people in terms of the housing and the allocations and the choices and the size of properties that we have, because we don't have any 9-bedroomed properties, and I don't know any local authorities that do.
Absolutely. And my comment wasn't with regards to taxpayers living in council homes. I grew up in one.
Yeah.
I was referring to
I'm a council house baby, yeah.
So I was referring to like the private owners compared to the council tenants. And again, the 3,000 that have been off the list, they'll be like, well, hang on a minute, why are we being penalised? That's how they'll see it.
Yeah.
That's what I'll get on the street.
I think, again, and thank you for that, Councillor Davis, I think what's really important is when we do the consultation, it's full public consultation. So importantly, residents and our people on the waiting list will be part of that consultation. In terms of that 3,000, we will be supporting them and saying, well, what is your housing need? Where else can we geographically help you? So we knew that when I joined 2 years ago, there was somebody on the council waiting list who earned £140-something thousand. I think you could question that they might have alternative options than being on our housing waiting list. And a conversation with that individual was around, and I was just being nosy and I was quite interested, but actually they'd made a personal choice to put their children into private school and found that council housing would have been the cheaper option, that would have maintained the housing and would have allowed them to continue their child's education. Now, that's a personal choice. It's not necessarily what we would assess as a housing need. So there's always checks and balances that we have to make to support
You're absolutely
people.
between a rock and a hard place. You will make somebody's day every day, and you'll break someone's dreams every day. And it's not a decision I would want to make every day. And and I salute you, but it's a difficult place to be.
And actually, one of the things we would advocate in terms of our housing strategy and with all members is to support us in that lobbying space with central government around, funding, housing, resource planning, all of those things that can help us to deliver. For those of you that would have seen the news today, there was reports that there was over 2,000 properties somewhere in London where actually they've been empty for 6 or 7 years because planning and safety and all of those compliance things haven't happened. And there are people who purchase to have a need. So bigger conversation that we're having here, but we do know we will disappoint some people, but we also know that we will put in considerable amount of work, Councillor Davis, to support those to be able to have some other options. And what we do find is that people sit on the list for 8 years and then get really annoyed because no one actually told them that actually they were probably never going to get housed. And I think there is that balance of managing expectations so people can start to look at the other options that were viable for them at that time, but by having sat on our waiting list with an incorrect expectation, have now potentially passed them. Thank you.
We'll come to Councillor Baker in a second, because you've been waiting. I do want to, though, be looking at wrapping this up. We are very over time. So if we can come to Councillor Baker, then response, and we'll be looking at possibly finishing.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be quick. And thank you very much to the officers for being patient and your thorough introduction of this agenda item. And also thank you to Councillor Hakewell for your question. I've certainly learned something tonight in relation to rural exception sites. I have a very pedantic question on procedure as to how the Council will satisfy its statutory requirements set out in Section 1683 of the Housing Act, 1996 as amended. That's in Section 7.2.4 of the papers, and where it indicates that when an authority makes an alteration to their scheme reflecting a major change of policy, you are required to bring the effect of that alteration to the attention of those likely to be affected by it. You then go on to say in the papers that you would satisfy that legal requirement by contacting all existing housing applicants of the draft changes, and you've made reference to that this evening. But that doesn't satisfy that legal requirement. That's just notifying existing applicants of the consultation, which is important, but it's not notifying them of any subsequent changes that are agreed and implemented. So, for example, if those proposals are subsequently implemented, will you notify all newly disqualified applicants of their new status? So I think the answer is yes, but just say I'm asking that question because that isn't clear from Section 7.2.4 of the report. Thank you.
Yes, that will happen. So I can make that more clear in the report going forward to executive, but we will be writing them to invite them to participate in the consultation. It's very important. But at the point that the decision is made, that is going to be in the new scheme, they will all be written to and offered advice and support on what alternative housing options are available to them. So they will get that in writing that that decision has been made. Very clear. Yeah.
Go ahead, yes, please. Microphone.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on the point made by Councillor Federich in relation to members needing advice and guidance in terms of how to manage expectations and direct people to services to look at viable housing solutions. Just wanted to mention that we are in the process of arranging member training in relation to Keyways, the process to actually help members with that. So I just thought I'd mention that here. Thanks.
Thank you. We just got one very quick question, have we, Councillor Eglin?
Yes, I probably already know the answer for this, but I've been asked to ask this. Are we going to still keep up the maze and work with the Armed Forces Covenant?
Yes.
That's what I wanted.
Yes, please.
If I can just clarify a point over homeowners. So in the current scheme, homeowners are not allowed, they don't qualify to join the current scheme. The only ones that do qualify are actually elderly homeowners who want to bid on sheltered complexes. It is only them that we are proposing to remove because homeowners already do not get onto the scheme. So it's the elderly ones who are waiting on sheltered accommodation that they're never going to get. As I said earlier, we will look at exceptional circumstances. We work with occupational therapy. We work with the Disabled Facilities Grant Team. We look at alternative housing options to adapt their own home, keep them in their own home. And if all of those options are exhausted and they have an urgent housing need A or B, which usually is A or B if it's a medical reason, let's say, for instance, they can't get up the stairs or use their bathing facilities, then we do have that facility now and in the proposed scheme to look at those exceptional circumstances and allow them to go on to the register.
Thank you. If we're happy to wrap up, because it's extremely late, Okay, we'll have a look at the quickly at the. So this report was only a note. So if no one's got anything to any recommendations to add. So I can confirm that members of the Scrutiny Committee have noted and considered the contents of the report and relevant appendices and have raised comments, feedback and concerns to officers as part of the scrutiny procedure. So on that basis, I'll thank the relevant officers for your time tonight. Extremely long time. And contributions during the debate. Councillor Howell.
Yeah, thank you. But I've been quite consistent with this at the end of every debate, and that's one of the recommendations that we considered at the group meeting was that feedback be given to this scrutiny committee on completion of the wider consultation exercise, and I think that would be useful for us to get that information come back as well. So I would like to propose that, Chair.
Do we have a seconder for that? Lovemore. So we'll take a vote on that quickly. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, so the last thing, is the Scrutiny Forward Work Programme. Just asking members to note the contents of the Scrutiny Work Programme for the forthcoming meetings of Place Environment Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Florich.
Thank you, Chair. Quick comment very quickly, just regarding the cemetery regulations. Could this also include green burial grounds as part of the report? Because this is something that we were told by officers would come back again, and it hasn't done. In detail, it would make sense as part of that report, or I believe it would, but I'm happy to be corrected if incorrect.
Yeah, we can feed that back to officers. Yep. Any other points? No. In that case, thank everyone for their time. There being no further business, I close